I've been dash delivering for a few months now and enjoy the freedom of not having a boss ordering me around. I can play whatever music I want in my car and take jobs I like while skipping the ones that tip poorly. I'm not saving much due to gas costs, but I am saving, and I was enjoying seeing new places and meeting new people. That changed after I received a notification for a $150 paying delivery. Immediately, I swiped accept and then pulled over to read it. I first expected this to be some out-of-state delivery to a wealthy individual longing for some Michelin-rated specialty. I regretted not checking the distance first, and after reading the address, I found it was a bit out in the sticks, but still very much worth the easy $150. I sighed with relief and pressed the GPS button to bring up the map to a restaurant named Danny's that I'd not previously heard of. The sun was setting early, as it does in October, and I had my lights on by the time I made it to a less populated corner of town where the restaurant was supposedly located. Dinner brings the best tips, but I hate driving at night since it's harder to find restaurants without a boldly emblazoned logo lit up in neon. That, and I've always harbored some lurking fear of a delivery-turned-mugging, or worse, some gang-initiated killing. Rare as it is, it has happened. You have arrived at your destination. The soothing voice of the GPS alerted me. I slowed to a stop, confused. I was on a dark residential street, no sign of a restaurant in sight. Where Danny's was supposed to be was a dark gap between two homes. I checked it again, even typing the restaurant name into maps outside of the delivery app, but nothing popped up. I realized then it might have been a glitch. In retrospect, $150 for a 30-minute delivery sounded too good to be true. I sighed and began searching the app for the troubleshooting menu when a loud slap on my passenger side window caused me to jump out of my skin. A man stood outside my car, his hand pressed against the pane. I rolled down the window, only a crack, just enough to hear him. "You the delivery driver?" he asked, and my mouth went dry. I didn't want to say yes because the vision of a pistol pulled and a muzzle flash kept playing in my mind. But he seemed harmless enough, older too. Mid-50s, receding hairline, thin frame. Not quite the gang initiation type. I was fairly certain everyone knew that delivery drivers nowadays don't carry cash. "Yeah, I'm looking for Danny's restaurant. Is it near here?" The man just looked at me with a hollow stare before raising his other hand. The fear of an impending bullet to the brain immediately dissipated when I saw a large plastic bag. I sighed in relief and lowered the window, accepting the delivery. It was large, much larger than I was used to delivering. I'd typically receive a styrofoam container or two, maybe a drink as well. This plastic bag contained a stapled paper one filled nearly to the top. I needed to use both hands to accept it. I placed the surprisingly heavy meal on the passenger seat, staring at it for a moment before looking up again. "Thank you." My words tapered off as I realized the man was already a few yards back. I watched him disappear into the shadow-filled gap between houses. I have no idea where he was going or where he had come from. Dark curiosity led me back to the app to see what I was even delivering. My confusion only heightened when I read the order. Danny's, it simply said, where cheeseburger, fries, and the like would typically be listed for me to check off upon pickup. Despite the questions tugging at my resolve, $150 for this awkward delivery was the overpowering factor. I swiped the slide after pickup bottom bar to continue the delivery. The GPS once again popped up, and I stared at the large green areas encompassing the pinpoint. My insides squirmed a bit at the revelation. The delivery address seemed to be dead in the middle of the woods. I shifted into drive and followed the directions onto the highway. The sun had fully set, but the tunes from the radio kept me in good spirits. Few people were on the road, so I was making great time and could call it an early night after this gig. The miles counted down: 15, 10, 5. The off-ramp came into view, and the large pine trees on either side of the highway continued to darken the path as I merged onto smaller roads. With every mile further into the wilderness, my uneasiness grew. More than a few times, my eyes darted over to the suspicious double-bag delivery on my seat. My heart raced as my mind played tricks on me in the shrouding darkness of the tall trees on either side. I did a double take when I thought I saw the bag rustle. Something within appeared to have moved. The last turn on the GPS signaled for me to take a left. It was a turn off of the paved asphalt road and onto a dirt road that cut into the woods. I slowed to a stop and double-checked the app, praying there was some sort of mistake. On occasion, the wrong address was listed. No luck, however. My destination was half a mile into the dense wall of pines. I took the turn and slowly drove into the dark tunnel, cutting through the arching trees. I could barely see the sky through the dense copse overhead, just darkness broken by the limb-like branches. With each rocking of the chassis and each bump in the narrow dirt road, that heavy bag on the passenger seat seemed to rustle. I fixed my eyes on the road, deciding not to look at it after I began to hear a faint noise emitting from the stapled inner bag, a noise that sounded like a faint wheezing. By the time I arrived at the destination, my knuckles were white from gripping the wheel so hard. I was sweating despite the autumnal chill that had breached my car and clothing. This part of the woods seemed colder than any part of the drive by at least 10 degrees. I shifted into park and looked at the app screen, the only source of light aside from my headlights, which faded only a few meters out. The address was supposedly on the left, and the instructions read, "Leave at door." There was no house in sight, however. It had to be a glitch of sorts. Above all else, I didn't want to leave the safety of my vehicle. This entire delivery had been all wrong. Something dreadful about it made me crave a shower. It made me want to run screaming from the situation I'd unknowingly gotten myself into. Crinkle. I saw the bag shift in my peripheral vision and let out a glottal yelp. I hurriedly opened the car door and got out, eager to distance myself from whatever was in the bag. I then navigated the menu of the app on my phone screen, seeking out the cancel order option. My score would go down. I'd miss out on the money, but I'd be able to get out of this strange gig that I wanted nothing more to do with. I was about to press confirm on the cancellation when I spotted the door. A few meters to my left, illuminated only faintly from the light of my phone's screen, stood a door. It looked ancient, its thick wooden beams bone white from petrification. The design was archaic, something that belonged on the side of a medieval European church. Black steel hinges and latches ornamented it, but the most noticeable feature was the one it was missing. The door was housed in a frame of charred black beams, but aside from that, it wasn't attached to anything. I stared at the structure and felt my heartbeat quicken. Dread and curiosity battled within my scrambling mind as it tried to register what this door was and why it was out there. I took a few hesitant steps towards it and felt the hairs on my body rise. With every step towards the detached door, the temperature dropped. I stepped around the unnatural thing to peer behind it, and sure enough, there was nothing behind it but endless trunks of trees. I'd made it this far, and I just wanted to get my money and get out. With a few deep breaths, I returned to my car and opened the passenger door. With 2 hands, I lifted the heavy delivery, which shook in my shivering arms. It moved, something gasped and gurgled from within, but I continued carrying the parcel over to that strange door. My teeth chattered from the chill as I placed the large bag on the dead leaves in front of the door. I took a photo to verify the delivery, then swiped to complete it. And with that, I rushed back to my car and got inside as quickly as possible. I then heard the faint cries of an infant. I saw the bag shift and shake, poked outward from the inside. I shifted into reverse and began to backtrack down the pitch-black road into the heart of the woods, but not before I saw that door creak open. Not before I saw that rotted black arm with long, desiccated fingers reach out eagerly. I watched it yank that screeching delivery bag into the impossible space behind the door that should not exist. If you're not familiar with what Meals on Wheels, MMOW, is, I'll explain. It's a community-based service, mostly made up of volunteers, aimed towards people who are homebound, most of whom are elderly or physically disabled. The basic premise is that the volunteer workers deliver pre-made, nutritious meals to those who need them. Many of the people rely on these meals to help meet their daily nutritional requirements and stay healthy. It's not a difficult job to do, and for the few years I did it, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I got to meet and get to know a lot of very friendly people, who sometimes would say I was the only contact they had with another human being at all. But that was before I started delivering to Ms. Taylor. It's not that Ms. Taylor was a bad person, she was just different from the other people I regularly delivered to. I didn't know much about her to start with. She was 82 years old, had been a widow for some time, and lived alone in the area with no other family nearby. The first time I made a delivery to her house, which was the only time she and I had briefly exchanged words, she mentioned having a son, but it had been some time since they had spoken. She mentioned something about having said harsh words to each other the last time they were together. I decided to leave the matter alone at that point. So, other than me, Ms. Taylor had no real contact with the outside world as she refused to have any additional checkups. She left specific instructions for her meals to be delivered and left on her doorstep, and that she would retrieve them later after I had left. This was not an unusual request, as there were other people who did this as well. Every time I would walk up to her front door, ring the doorbell per her instructions, and leave the cooler with food near the door. I then always took the empty cooler from the previous day back with me as I left. For some reason, I would briefly glance through the front window as I walked away, just enough to see her sitting in her living room chair facing the television. I felt sad each time I took that glance, feeling some amount of pity for her. I figured she had grown tired of human contact, as I'm sure she felt like her family had left her all alone, although not intentionally on her former husband's part. I've had enough conversations with people like her to know this with certainty. About a week went by, and the routine continued on for the most part without much change. I got a new client here and there, but with Ms. Taylor, it was always the same. The empty cooler was always there waiting, and she was always sitting in her chair staring at the television. Now, I couldn't actually see her face, so I thought she may have been sleeping in the chair at that time as well. Sometimes I would wonder what else she did to help pass the time. One day, the delivery was going as usual, except this time when I picked up the empty cooler and turned to leave, I noticed the front door had been left slightly ajar. Despite my instructions not to enter the home, I had an obligation to inspect and report any possible medical emergency to the authorities. I pushed the door open slowly and gave it 3 solid knocks. When I heard no response, I repeated the action, but this time I vocally announced my presence as well. I heard no response yet, and I decided to enter the home, still announcing myself as to not potentially startle Miss Taylor. The first thing to hit me was how cold it was in the house, despite it being the middle of the fall season. I had expected quite the opposite for an 82-year-old individual. I made my way into the living room towards her chair. I saw that she was still sitting, facing the television. I softly called out to her, "Miss Taylor, your door was open." Nothing, no movement at all. "Miss Taylor?" It was then I came around to the front of the chair and made eye contact with her. Her eyes had a glazed-over look, and her mouth was wide open, like I had interrupted her in a moment of gasping for breath. "Oh, shit," I blurted out as I stepped back. I then made my second bad decision that day. I reached out to try and find her pulse and see if she was breathing at all, as I knew basic CPR. I grabbed her wrist but dropped it in a split second as her arm was ice cold to the touch. She was clearly dead, but I couldn't have known for how long. I called for an ambulance, but soon after they showed up, they confirmed my suspicions. They estimated she had been dead for some time, as it takes a while for the body to cool completely after death has occurred. The police soon arrived and began to question me about what happened. I told them everything I knew about Ms. Taylor and what I had found. They could see how shaken up I was, so they let me go, asking me to be available for further questioning if needed. My supervisor gave me a few days off to collect myself, but I had considered not continuing to make deliveries. I decided against that initially, as I didn't want to let my other clients down, and I had really enjoyed getting to know them all. The local news station had been reporting about my grisly finding of Ms. Taylor, but luckily my face never showed up on the TV screen. I had not wanted to become a local celebrity, and definitely not like that. As I was listening to one of the reports one night, something occurred to me that hadn't dawned on me until that moment, perhaps because I had been in a state of shock up until then. The news reported that Ms. Taylor had been found dead in her home, and that it was determined she had been dead for at least a full week. A whole week. I had been picking up empty coolers every day for a week. Who the hell had been eating her food if she was dead then? I got my answer a few days later. Apparently, the police had suspected foul play was involved, based on the information I had given them and by their own investigation. I'm guessing the missing food had something to do with it. One night, an unmarked patrol car was watching the house when the officers spotted a man sneaking out the back kitchen window. He was immediately detained, and the man turned out to be Ms. Taylor's estranged son, the one she had exchanged words with some time ago. The police determined that he had returned to the house at some point, probably spoke with Ms. Taylor and convinced her to let him in. They suspected he had poisoned her with a cocktail of her own medication soon after and was living in the house unknown to anyone else. It was later revealed in the news he had a history of mental illness. Ms. Taylor had been murdered by her own son, left in her chair, and he had been eating the meals that I had delivered. I wonder if any of those days I had looked in at her through the front window, if he was watching me through another window somewhere. Who knows how long she would have stayed in that chair, rotting away if I hadn't paid attention to the door that day. Maybe her son had left it open intentionally, to lure me in so he could kill me as well. I'll never know for sure. She didn't deserve that kind of end to a lonely existence. Nobody does. That day after I heard that news report, I quit working for Meals on Wheels for good. I used to order a lot of food online from many different apps and websites. Name a food delivery site, and I've probably been on it. I haven't had a car for a while, and I hate cooking. So if I wasn't out with friends getting food at a restaurant, I was getting it delivered to me. My favorite apps were Uber Eats, DoorDash, and Skip the Dishes, which I would cycle between every time. A cool feature on all three of these apps is the ability to communicate with and see the profile of your driver. You can see their name and picture on the app, and if you tap on More Details, you can even see how many orders they've delivered and their driver rating out of 5 stars. Sometimes, when I'm bored waiting, I look at the profile and check these things. I usually get drivers with 5 stars and tons of completed orders since I tip very well, and am probably a highly rated customer. Now, I had been doing this for several months, and it had developed from habit to possibly an addiction. After you order food so many times, you start to notice that you get the same drivers, which makes sense since you can only have so many in the area. I didn't live in a very big town, so there couldn't have been that many drivers. Usually, I would see the same guy pop up again every week or so. That is, until Joe. I don't remember the first time he delivered to me, but I remember the first time I noticed I had seen him before. It was in the evening, probably around 8 p.m., and I had ordered from Red Lobster on DoorDash. I saw his name and profile picture, Joe, novice driver. He was a bald white man, probably in his 40s. He had a 5-star rating despite having only completed 15 orders so far. He was clearly new to the app. I was a bit cautious since he was new, so I was watching his delivery speed and tracking him on the map throughout the whole delivery. He seemed to slow down as he entered my neighborhood. I lived in a pretty wealthy area with lots of kids, so it's possible he was trying to be safe. Other than that, though, it was normal. I watched outside my window as he walked up to my front door, dropped the food off, and left. That was the most normal delivery he had done with me. 2 days later, I switched over to Uber Eats for an order from McDonald's. It was around 10 p.m., dark outside. I placed it, and straight away it showed a driver had accepted my order. Joe. Newbie. Same name, same profile picture, same person. 2 days after the last one. This time, it showed that he had completed only 2 orders before that. Somehow, I had gotten the same guy on 2 different apps within 2 days. At this point, I was a bit creeped out, but I rationalized that maybe Joe was just new to this. He had signed up on 2 different delivery apps somehow and, by chance, had gotten me as a customer at least 3 times already. I realize now, as I write this, that this didn't really make sense at all, but I guess I was hungry and didn't really care at the time. I didn't bother canceling since even if I really wanted to, there wasn't a refund guarantee after they started preparing your order and had already matched a driver. I stalked his location the entire way, about 20 minutes of staring at a mini car on a map driving to my house. Despite my worries, he actually drove at a normal speed. Not sure what I expected, though. The odd part was once he got to my house. This time, he parked in my empty driveway. He walked up to the door, dropped off the food, and then went back to his car. Instead of leaving right after, though, his car did not move for a good 10 minutes. It was as if he was waiting for me to come outside before leaving. God knows why. I usually wait until the driver is completely gone before grabbing my food since I feel like it's awkward if they see me grab it. So, I waited until he left. Anyway, after 10 minutes, he finally pulled out of my driveway and drove away. I brushed the whole situation off as him parking in my driveway because he's new and staying because he was waiting for a new order, then tried to forget about it. I didn't feel like ordering food for a bit because of the situation. Instead, I just walked to the grocery store and bought my own food like a normal person. After about a week, though, I was craving some late-night fast food, so I placed an order from McDonald's again, but this time on Skip the Dishes. Although I didn't have any actual reason to worry yet, I didn't really want Joe to be my driver again, and I hadn't seen him on Skip before. I placed the order, and to my relief, the name did not read Joe. This time, I had Ryan delivering my food, thank God. I didn't even bother watching the order. I just wanted to get my food without stressing about it, so I watched some TV while I waited. After 20 minutes or so, I got a ping on my phone saying, "Your order's almost here. It's five minutes away." I wanted to see the driver's location, so I tapped on the notification and it opened up the app. Ryan was indeed 5 minutes away. Then I got curious and decided to check out Ryan's profile. I felt like enjoying, once again, having a driver with at least more than 50 completed orders. It's a damn good thing I was curious that day. I opened the profile up, and to my horror, the profile picture was the exact same as Joe's. He was just using a different name. Ryan had 0 orders completed. It's like he had just signed up for this one order. I had still not escaped Joe, or Ryan, or whatever the hell his name really was. My mind was racing. Who the hell is Joe? Why the hell is he my only delivery guy? Why is he using a different name? What does he want? Why did he stay in my driveway for 10 minutes? This guy was less than 5 minutes away and I was terrified. I had no idea what to do. I decided to pretend I wasn't home, so I shut all of my lights off, locked all my doors, closed all my windows, all that stuff. Then I went down to the window where I could watch as he arrived to deliver my McDonald's. It was pitch black outside, except for the streetlights on the road, so nobody could see into my house with the lights off. This window that I watched through was relatively hidden. It was from the basement and very low to the ground, hard to spot. It also conveniently had a view of the entire front area of the house, including my front door and driveway. I was confident he wouldn't see me through this window, so I sat and waited. Those next minutes felt like hours, as I held a baseball bat in my hand ready for anything. He arrived just on time, but this time he stopped on the road like the drivers usually do, instead of in my driveway. I watched, paranoid, as he walked toward my house, seemingly very slowly. I was expecting him to start banging on my doors, maybe break a window, or even start yelling at me to come out. But then I noticed he actually had my bag of food with him as he walked toward my front door. Surprisingly enough, he just walked up to my door and dropped my food off. I looked down at my bat in immense relief, laughing to myself about how worried I was. I heard his car start up and drive off shortly after, listening to it drive away until it was too far to hear anymore. He was gone. All he did was deliver my food. Turns out this guy's just a new driver. Probably changed his name to hide his real identity from the customers. I had nothing to do with it. I was just being paranoid. Still, though, I told myself I would never order food online like this again. I get way too paranoid over these little things, and it's an addiction I need to get over. His car started again and drove away a couple of seconds after he had dropped the food off, probably running back quickly to get to his next order. I dropped my bat and started walking towards my front entrance to grab my food, now hungry as ever and still amused by my overreaction. As I'm walking, I smile and think, damn, he's a fast runner, ha ha. He must be rushing to get those orders as a new driver. Actually, how the hell did he get back to his car that fast? Damn, I wish I was that fast, heh. I'm about to flip the front entrance light switch on, and then I realize, did he even walk back to his car? I'm standing there, frozen, my finger touching the light switch. I'm trying to figure out if this is just my paranoia or if this is a reasonable concern. Part of me is telling me not to check, because if what I'm thinking is true, then I'm going to freak out. I'm still not visible from the outside through my front door window, but it's just around the corner of this wall in front of me. I decide to go back to my hidden window just to check. I walk into the basement, climb onto my step stool, and peer through the window. I check everywhere but the front door. I check the driveway, the lawn, the road, as if I don't want to find what I'm looking for. Finally, I look straight at the area in front of my front door, and just as I horrifyingly expected, Joe was waiting for me, knife in hand, just outside the entrance to my house. I could barely see his silhouette, but the streetlights in the back made him visible. If I had opened the door to get my food, he probably would have attacked me and killed me. I was moments away from revealing my presence to him with that light. I was in complete shock. I could not believe that I was looking at a killer just outside my door. My inner thoughts were going insane. I sat still staring at him, ensuring he did not move an inch, while my mind felt like it was about to explode. What the folk? What the hell is going on? He must have gotten a second guy to drive away for him, so I would think he left. What kind of folked up shit is this? Why is he even doing this? Is he trying to rob me? Is he just a folking serial killer? Folk? What do I even do? Should I call the police? No. What if he decides to break in if I don't come out? I have to divert him. Shit, I hope this works. I pull out my phone, open the app, and tap on Communicate with your driver. I send a quick message. Hey, man, sorry. I just realized I had the wrong address in. I'm actually at my friend's house right now, but I forgot to switch it. Would you be able to come here instead? The reply comes after a short pause. Oh, okay. I just left though, so I'd have to go back to get your food. I hesitate for a moment before responding. Oh, gotcha. You know what? Don't worry about it, man. I can probably cook something up here instead. I'll increase your tip though since you were so understanding. I go ahead and add $10 to his tip, feeling a bit better about the situation. A moment later, his response pops up. Oh, thanks. Yeah, this is my first order actually, so thanks a lot. I hope I get you again as a customer. I'd be happy to meet you. I smile and type back, oh yeah, for sure. Have a good night, man. You too, he replies. I then closed the app and called the police right away. I explained everything on the 911 call and watched as Joe's driver picked him back up. I guess he was planning on coming back again based on what he said in the messages. The police came about 15 minutes later and came inside. I talked to them about the whole situation, the changed name, repeated deliveries, the part where he waited for me in my driveway for 10 minutes, everything. They said they would contact the 3 food delivery services to try and find and arrest Joe and his accomplice, but they also explained it would be difficult to accomplish with no actual evidence. Needless to say, I moved to a new town 2 weeks later. No way in hell am I leaving Joe with my address. The police watched my house and patrolled the area until I moved, in case he showed up, but he never did. He was probably waiting for another order from me. Since then, I have deleted all of my food delivery apps and will definitely never touch one ever again. I can just make my own damn food. Okay, so? Not gonna lie. I am, key DNA, freaking the hell out. This has been happening for the past 3 days, and I don't know how to deal with it anymore. Some background. I am from Malaysia. I live alone in a budget apartment. Our country's been on full lockdown for over 2 weeks now, and my basic life schedule is completely messed up. I am usually up all night until the morning of the next day, sleeping during the afternoons to late evening. Rinse and repeat. This was largely okay for me. Being up at night by myself is invigorating since it's so peaceful and calm. The air is cooler and the world is quiet. Most of the time, I just fool around on the internet, reading and watching videos after getting some work done. However, as I've mentioned, starting 3 days ago, I've been getting delivery riders coming to my door at the dead of night, usually around 3 a.m. The first time it happened, I was startled, sure. I live alone. It's 3 a.m. Getting knocks on your door at that time can only mean bad news. I quickly opened my door after putting on my mask, only to see a guy dressed in a polo shirt with a cap holding a box of pizza. Relaxing a bit, I told the guy, "Wrong house, bro," and tried to shut the door to get back to my business. But he stopped me with a "Please, boss, please." I turned back around. The guy tried to push the pizza box towards me. "Please, sir, take it, your order." I shook my head firmly and said, "No, I didn't order anything. You've got the wrong house, man." But he didn't seem to be listening. He kept repeating, "Please, boss, take it, your order," while pushing the box towards me. At this point, I, Keek DNA, figured maybe this guy didn't understand what I was saying, or maybe he was disabled in some way. So I took the box thinking maybe the delivery address would be on it or something. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't the usual chain store brand like Domino's or Pizza Hut. The logo was just GAB in block letters, which isn't a brand I know of. There was no delivery address tacked onto the box or anything, so I tried asking for a receipt from the guy, but he just shook his head and said, "No receipt," while backing away, ready to leave. I tried to stop him to hand him back the box, but he just wouldn't have it. He left hurriedly, and I ended up with a free box of mystery pizza. Now, I probably should be stoked because it's free pizza, but it's 3 a.m. It's from an unknown place from a brand I've never heard of, and it's delivered by one of the shadiest dudes I've ever met in my life. So, I did what any reasonable person should do and left it outside my door, thinking I'll just throw it out with my trash in the morning. My sister always told me to never pick up strange things from outside. Easiest way to avoid bringing in any bad luck or trouble, she'd say. After that, I got back on my computer, feeling just a tad weirded out, but not really thinking too much of it. Eventually, the sun rose, and I went outside to take out my trash. When I got outside, though, the pizza box wasn't there anymore. It was a little strange, but I just shrugged it off as maybe the janitor or someone throwing it out for me. I proceeded with my day as usual and almost completely forgot about the whole thing, until the knocking came again. I looked at the time. 2:45 a.m. What the hell? I got up, put on my mask, and opened the door. A different guy in the same uniform from yesterday stood in front of me, holding yet another box of pizza. "Sir, your order, please. Take it." I shook my head no. No order. It's not mine. Wrong house, man," I told him. This time, I managed to just shut the door behind me before he could stop me. I stood by for a few more minutes, watching the guy out of my peephole. At first, he just stared blankly at the door. After it became apparent I wasn't coming back out, the guy just put the box down in front of my door and walked away. Satisfied, I went back to my desk and sat back down, grumbling to myself about how bizarre and annoying it is to have this happen twice. Did some troll find my address and is pranking me? But the guy didn't ask for payment or anything. Is it just to harass me? Who would do that? Why me? Attempts to look up the pizza place returned no result, though it is also possible that it is a roadside business with no online presence. While all these thoughts were swirling in my mind, a realization hit me, and I felt my heart stop cold. It's lockdown right now. No restaurant can operate past 8 p.m. How could anyone be delivering food at this hour? Also, riders are not supposed to walk up to the apartment themselves. They are supposed to leave the food at the guardhouse for pickup. So then who the hell was outside my door? A chill shot down my spine. Internally freaking out, I quickly crawled to my bed, trying to calm my whirring brain. It's probably nothing. I didn't take the pizza in and I didn't eat it either. If it happens again, I'll just get security and call the cops. It's gonna be okay. This is real life. This is real life, I repeated silently in my heart, with my eyes squeezed shut, until I finally drifted off to sleep. Day 3. 9 p.m. I wake up and go through my routine, nervously keeping an eye on the time. I tried my best to get my work for the day done, but it was impossible to focus. I kept waiting anxiously for the knocking to come. The clock ticked away. I stared at my computer, desperate for distraction. 2:25 a.m. "Boss, your order, boss. Please, take it. Your order, boss." Noise from outside the door. I froze in my seat for a solid 5 minutes, staring at the door. "Boss, your order, boss." The noise continued to repeat and became more bizarre. I continued to wait without making a sound until the knocking stopped. I can't say for sure how long it went on. Maybe 10 minutes or so. I kept waiting, The silence stretched on. It was an abrupt change from the incessant knocking just a few minutes prior. I glanced at the clock on my computer. 2:55 a.m. It's been 30 minutes since the first knocks. Gathering all of my courage, I stepped quietly towards the door and peeped out of the peephole, hoping it was all just a big misunderstanding. It was all just a simple mistake, and whoever was outside the door had left like a normal person. But to my absolute horror, the guy was still there, standing straight and staring blankly at my door, holding the pizza box. I gaped in shock. All of a sudden, as if sensing I was there, the guy snapped his head up and stared straight back at me through the peephole. I got so startled I almost fell backwards. He had no eyes. This guy, or thing, had no goddamn eyes. Just two gaping sockets where the eyeballs should have been. I stared on, frozen in shock. Slowly, his lips started to quirk upwards, curving into a smile so wide it looked downright unnatural. Then, in a cheery voice bordering on excitement, he said, "Sayatau yuada ketsana." I recognized that saying in a book about ghosts a long time ago. It means, "I know you there." This time, I fell back with a loud thud and a yell. I scrambled away from the door as fast as I could, backing into the corner of the room while keeping an eye on the door. This was when the banging started. "Boss! Your order! Boss! Your order! Boss!" The thing outside kept repeating cheerily in between the non-stop banging. To say I was about to shit my pants was a major understatement. I was ready to die on the spot, quite frankly, and honestly saw no other way out of this at that moment. I kept my eyes closed, huddled in the corner of the room, just thinking, "This is it. I'm gonna die. This is it." Suddenly, a loud, angry yell came from next door. "Who the hell is making all that noise?" I heard thudding footsteps and the sound of my neighbor's door opening. There was a pause. Then, it was back to silence. There was no more banging, no more cheery voice repeating, "Your order, boss, your order." I heard my neighbor's door shut and footsteps retreating. Shakily, I stood up and walked to my bed. I curled up under the covers with my eyes shut tight. But sleep didn't come. My entire body was on alert, dreading when the thing would come back knocking, calling me in that cheery voice. Racked with fear and anxiety the entire night, I was still absolutely exhausted when the first rays of sunlight peeked into the room through the window blinds. I checked the time, 6:30 a.m. I crawled out of bed, got dressed, and walked down to security. I explained what happened these past 3 nights to the guard, leaving out the fact that what I saw could be inhuman. I suppose I was still clinging to some hope that it was a mistake, that my imagination got the better of me and his empty eye sockets were just a trick of the light. However, after listening to my explanation, the guard just gave me a look of confusion and doubt. He told me that nobody had been allowed up to the complex as per the rules and even offered to show me the security footage when he saw how scared I looked. When the footage rolled, I could feel the blood draining from my face. It was just as the guard said. No one was allowed into the complex at the time of the incidents. As a matter of fact, no one was shown outside my door either. There was nothing I could say. I just thanked the guard and headed back to my room. Could I be hallucinating? That could be it. Maybe this lockdown schedule is messing up my brain more than I can take, I thought to myself as I trudged upstairs. As I was about to open the door to my room, however, the next-door neighbor stepped outside. He shot me a glare and said, "Hey man, what the hell was making all that noise at your door yesterday, huh? Don't you have any goddamn manners? Don't you know 3 a.m. is when people sleep? If it happens again, I'll report you, man." Then he slammed his door shut. He heard it too. He actually heard it. It's real. It's goddamn real. Now I'm in my room, typing this out, looking at the clock. It's 1:30 a.m. right now. It'll come soon. I don't know what to do. Save me. I've always wanted to be a mother. I remember when I was in kindergarten, all the kids were supposed to share what they wanted to be when they grew up. Most kids said things like firefighter, astronaut, doctor, cat doctor, etc. I said mother. My teacher, Miss Moss, told me I could be a mother as well as something else and urged me to pick another dream job. I honestly couldn't think of one, but because all the other kids were staring at me, I blurted out, "Teacher." That made Miss Moss smile, but it made me feel bad because I knew I was lying to her. I've always hated lying to people. That's why I'm going to tell you the truth. I promise. I always knew I was going to be a mother, but never in a million years could I ever have imagined I'd have a daughter like Freya. When I was in my teens, I got my first serious boyfriend, Jack. I started birth control because I knew it was the responsible thing to do. Logically, I knew I wasn't ready to be a mother, but I still couldn't help the feeling of despair that washed over me each time I swallowed another pill. Emotionally, it felt so wrong, putting this barrier between myself and my longest-held dream. Sometimes I'd even cry. These feelings became especially acute when Jack and I decided to get married. I wanted to start our family immediately, but Jack wanted us to finish university and get settled in our careers before talking about kids. I agreed that was the logical thing to do. I kept swallowing those pills while pouring my longing into journals. I'd make lists of baby names and dream about who my child would grow up to be. Would they want to be a doctor? Or perhaps an investigative journalist? Maybe their greatest desire would be to be a parent, like me. I followed mommy bloggers online, memorizing their tips and tricks so I'd be ready to be the best mom ever, simultaneously wondering if my family would be as perfect as theirs. But I honestly wasn't looking for perfection. I just wanted to have a happy kid who would feel loved as their unique self. I knew whoever arrived, I was ready to love them to the stars and back. I was going to be the best mom I knew I would be. Finally, Jack and I were ready to start our family. But it turned out harder than I had expected. Much harder. Months turned into years, and every negative test hit like a knockout punch. It never got easier. It probably didn't help that I was still following those perfect mommy bloggers with their perfect families. So I started following others who were sharing about their fertility journeys. People who were struggling as much as me. That helped me start sharing my own experiences. It felt so good knowing that I wasn't alone. It felt like being a part of this amazing community of people I had never met. Each time a fellow struggler finally found success, we all congratulated them joyfully. But alone, with Jack, I'd cry. I was tired of waiting for my turn. I know this wasn't only taking a toll on me, Jack was struggling too. One day, while I was crying in his arms, he asked me, "If we aren't able to have kids, would a life with just the two of us be so bad?" My silence was enough for us both to understand my answer to that. Jack and I decided to use all of our savings to try IVF. The process was tough emotionally and physically. Injections, ultrasounds, waiting, but it all felt worth it to me. Then, finally, it happened. I was pregnant. The world finally felt like it made sense to me. Jack and I were overjoyed. I felt like I was walking on fluffy white clouds. That was before I knew what was coming. We found out I was carrying a boy. We named him Oliver. But then, during a routine ultrasound, everything changed. The technician's silence and the doctor's grave expression told us what we didn't want to hear. Something was wrong. Those fluffy white clouds I'd been walking on. They became dark storm clouds that surrounded me for the rest of the pregnancy. We knew our son wasn't going to live long after his birth. In the end, one day was all we got with our perfect boy. I loved him to the stars and back, and I still do. Hey, I just wish I could have done something more to give him more time. I couldn't help but feel I had failed him as a mother. The next days, weeks, months passed in a haze of grief so heavy I didn't know how we'd survive it. The nursery we'd so joyfully prepared now felt like a cruel joke. Silence felt deafening, and any noise was the wrong noise. I'd like to say that our relationship grew stronger through our shared grief, but it didn't. I wanted to start trying for another baby. I thought it would help us step forward out of the darkness we had felt trapped in. I thought it would be good for us to have something to look forward to. But Jack said he wasn't ready. He said we had to build back up our savings. It didn't take me long to get him to admit that actually, the main reason was that he was scared about having another sick child. Jack packed his bag to stay at a hotel for a night. He said he just needed a bit of space. He never moved back. Somehow, in the midst of all this, I found myself back online, sharing my story. The responses poured in, messages of love and shared pain, messages I clung onto with desperation, as if each were a lifeline. I was in the bleakest part of my life, and those lifelines were essential. To make things even worse, I couldn't keep up with the mortgage, so I had to list our house for sale. I shared all of this with my followers. Now I wonder, if I'd never shared anything online, would my daughter even exist? I think it was because I shared my story that the New Genesis Institute found me. Maybe Dr. Hart did personally read my posts, or maybe an algorithm pointed them towards who they were looking for. A desperate woman who would give anything, do anything, for a child. I don't know how they found me, but I know that Freya wouldn't exist without them. It was early on a Sunday morning when I received this email. We are thrilled to extend to you an invitation to participate in an exclusive opportunity at the New Genesis Institute, a private fertility clinic dedicated to pioneering the future of human health and wellness. After learning about your fertility challenges and the heartbreaking loss you've endured, we believe you are uniquely positioned to benefit from and contribute to the groundbreaking work at the New Genesis Institute. Your journey has resonated deeply with Dr. Evelyn Hart, whose mission is not only to support those facing struggles, but also to advance the science of preventative medicine for future generations. To access your official invitation, please first sign the required DNA. There was a link to an DNA. I was nervous about clicking anything. It looked legit, but was this really some sort of horrible scam? By doing a quick search online, I learned that the New Genesis Institute was funded by Dr. Evelyn Hart, a billionaire philanthropist who had been funding health initiatives for years. There were hardly any photos of her. Dr. Hart appeared notorious for staying away from the public eye, but her name was credited on numerous scientific journals. She seemed super impressive. Dr. Hart had made her fortune early in her career when she innovated a disease testing device now used in clinics around the world. I suddenly felt something I hadn't in a long time: excitement and hope. My heart started to beat fast in my chest. I decided to take the leap. I clicked the DNA. Heart racing now, I skimmed an extensive document. Gleaning it was meant to ensure that any and all information about the Institute would remain strictly confidential. I signed it swiftly and pressed Submit. Then, I was taken to my official invitation. I'll share it with you here. Thank you for considering the New Genesis Institute. Founded by renowned Dr. Evelyn Hart, the New Genesis Institute is at the forefront of revolutionary research in preventative medicine, with a focus on creating healthier and stronger generations. We are conducting a series of elite fertility treatments, designed not only to help women conceive, but to ensure that future children are born with optimal health to give them the best possible chance in life. Should you decide to take part in our program, you will receive Personalized fertility treatments designed by Dr. Hart and her team. Accommodation during your treatment and pregnancy at the New Genesis Institute. Personalized health care for the duration of your participation. Financial support for you and your child in the years of their development in exchange for participation in scheduled health monitoring for research purposes. The opportunity to contribute to a better future, ensuring that the next generation is equipped to thrive. This invitation is offered to a select few individuals and is fully funded by Dr. Hart's personal investment in the future of medicine. Your resilience and willingness to embrace new possibilities have made you an ideal candidate for our program. If you want to participate in our innovative fertility program, please RSVP at your earliest convenience. We look forward to the opportunity to welcome you to the New Genesis Institute. I stared at that letter for I don't know how long, reading it and rereading it and rereading it. Then, suddenly, before I even realized I was making the decision, I was responding. Thank you so much for reaching out. Yes, I would love to participate. Their response came quickly. I received an email with detailed instructions. A private car would pick me up on March 1st, followed by a flight to their facility. The email explained that the New Genesis Institute was located on a private island, a place that, from the photos in the email, looked more like a resort than a clinic. Towering palm trees and sparkling blue water surrounded white buildings that gleamed in the sunlight. It didn't seem real, but then again, no part of this whole situation felt real. It didn't bother me at the time that I couldn't find the institute on a map. They had detailed extreme secrecy in the DNA. Instead of being nervous, I preferred to embrace a dream of a different reality that took me away from my current depressing existence. Plus, it was perfect timing. I was looking for a rental starting March 1st, and as accommodation was included during my stay at the institute, I wouldn't have to worry about that. All I had to do was move all my stuff to a storage unit and let my life take me where it was going to take me. I had spent so many years trying to achieve a specific plan. Giving over to this felt right to me somehow. It felt like winning the lottery. I let that high feeling carry me to March 1st. When March 1st came, that was the first time I felt true fear. What if this was all a scam? Or worse, a joke? Was someone playing me? And if they were, why? But the car arrived precisely when it said it would, and it took me to an airport where I was welcomed onto a small plane. Apart from the crew, there were two other people on board, Claire and Mariah. I learned that they were also going to participate in Dr. Hart's treatment. On the flight, we got to know each other better. Claire and Mariah had very similar stories to my own. They both had trouble conceiving and didn't have the funds for any alternate route to motherhood. Claire was a widow. Her husband died of cancer, and Mariah was recently single. Mariah also had a child who had passed away in infancy. Neither of them had any other children, but desperately wanted them. We were all so excited about being selected by Dr. Hart for her program. Claire and Mariah agreed that the whole thing didn't seem real. But, like me, they let their hope for a child lead their decision to make this epic leap of faith. The plane landed on a pristine airstrip. We were greeted by uniformed staff who smiled and greeted us as if they already knew us personally. An especially friendly staff member, Lurk, took us under her wing. She escorted us towards the main building where we were told we'd be introduced to Dr. Hart. Touching my feet to that island, seeing those buildings, this is when things really started feeling real for me. The facility looked amazing. There were little cottages dotted around a larger main building. Lark told us that each of us would get our own cottage for the duration of our stay. Gardens weaved throughout. Lark explained that we were free to roam the grounds of the facility, but the north half of the island had eroding cliffs that were super dangerous. A border wall made a division between that part of the island and the facility, so as long as we didn't try to get over the wall, we'd be safe. Dr. Hart emerged from the main building to greet us. She was poised and magnetic, with piercing green eyes. They weren't unkind, but had a calculating quality to them. She seemed to be assessing us from the moment she laid eyes on us. She spoke with measured confidence. "Welcome. You've made the right choice coming here. I promise we'll take excellent care of you." She urged us to explore the island and take time to get to know the other women we'd be going on this journey with. I learned there were 20 of us. Before we were permitted to start fertility treatment, we spent our days in group therapy sessions, sharing our stories, our hopes, and fears. We came from different backgrounds, different countries even, but we all shared a unique bond. Every one of us was single. We had all suffered a tragic loss of a loved one, and we all had the seemingly impossible dream of motherhood. In the evenings, we'd wander the gardens or sit by the ocean. We'd often talk late into the night, bonding further over our excitement. But I realized that Mariah, who had seemed so excited about this opportunity on the plane, was growing increasingly nervous about being on the island. She didn't want to talk loudly about it, though, as she said we were probably being watched and listened to. She seemed scared of Dr. Hart. I kept looking for hidden cameras, but I couldn't see any. I told her she was just being paranoid. I assume now that Mariah was probably right, but then I was actually mad at her for putting a damper on everyone's excitement. Finally, the day arrived that we would be beginning treatment. We all gathered in the main building where Dr. Hart would be speaking to us. There, we realized that our group of 20 was now 14. 6 women, including Mariah, were no longer there. Dr. Hart explained that there were a few women who were assessed as incompatible for the program and so were returned home. Dr. Hart explained our treatment process in detail. They would be using innovative science that combined traditional IVF with advanced genetic optimization techniques. She told us she had made her fortune by diagnosing problems, but she wanted to fix them. "You were selected," she said, "because you understand the anguish that comes with seeing a loved one held back by nothing but their own biology. You want a better life for your children. Not only will we be ensuring you conceive, we will also be ensuring your child has the strongest possible biological DNA. A healthier, brighter future for all humanity begins here." She told us that if anyone was uncomfortable with proceeding, they were welcome to step out and they would be flown home. She also made it clear that choosing to stay would mean we'd be leaving with a child. There was no question in my mind. I was going to stay. All of the remaining women stayed. We all wanted to bring our babies home. The 14 of us then began treatment. Apart from numerous injections, it honestly felt like the best holiday I'd ever been on. We were so well cared for. We always had the best food to eat, and massages and therapy whenever we needed it. The staff were amazing. In therapy, we were encouraged to see the health benefits our children were receiving as the future of humanity. We felt good about contributing to a healthy new generation. Every single one of us became pregnant quickly. Regular scans and health checks told us our babies were growing well. I was told I'd be having a girl. I was in bliss, falling in love with my little girl who I had yet to meet. She had strong kicks inside me, so I wanted a strong name for her. I named her Freja. I wondered if she would look like her brother. One night, Claire and I were sitting on the beach beneath the stars. Both our bellies had grown large by this time. I was stroking mine with love, but Claire just stared at hers. She made a grimace as her baby gave her a mighty kick. I could even see the press of his little foot against her stomach. Claire seemed troubled, her usual bright smile replaced by a shadow of doubt. "What's wrong?" I asked her. "Do you ever feel like there's something off?" This is my day off, my day to watch TV and do nothing. My name is Ada, and I'm a volunteer for my local council. When it comes to helping people get their shopping during lockdown, you have two options. Commit yourself to a stuffy warehouse in this blistering heat. Radio top 10 hits being blasted at you while you fill up a box with groceries and the like. Or take those filled boxes in your car to the residents who requested them. I chose the latter, mostly because my people limit is around 1 or 2 at any given time. The usual clientele are the obvious. Older people, people with compromised immune systems, really anyone who it's strongly advised doesn't pop to the shops during this time, even with the mask and gloves. For every order, I get a sheet, a neat little summary of the recipient, their name, contact details, address, and the reason they require the delivery. All useful information to have at my disposal. I've been trapped inside for years of my life, like a startled moth flittering at the hilt of a glass jar. So, if I can do anything to set these people free from even some of that pain, I will. The purpose of me writing here is to share something that happened over a stretch of a couple of weeks. Something I have to share. Otherwise, I'm liable to bury it behind so many walls I'll forget it altogether. Oh, how the traumatized mind works its wonders. After almost running over a cat, I was a little shaken, and the elderly lady looking out from 24B had seen the whole thing. My sweating hands fumbled all over the bottom of the box of groceries as I begged the universe to suspend its laws and successfully transfer all its weight to the roof of my car. 2 oranges made an escape and began snowballing all the way down to the outer wall of Peace Gardens, where they collided with dusty brick with an unsatisfying thwack. I grimaced, looking up at the old lady. She was wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. Phew, I took her to be Mrs. Willis. At least the phone said so. I'd sheepishly texted her for help with directions after circling a couple of nearby roads more times than I'm willing to admit. So Mrs. Willis had definitely led me here, to this adorable and giggly granny. My phone began to go off. It was a text. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I didn't see a thing, X." I looked up at the window, and she winked at me. Then she was gone, so I took the opportunity to lug the box to her front door, which she promptly answered. "Hello, Ada, is it?" She beamed, still chuckling. "Yes, hi, hello." I just about managed to muster that before she made a lunge for the crusty white loaf with all the strength in her tiny body and said, "Oh, sweetheart, no. You've put the bread in the wrong way, see?" She flipped it over. Now, the exposed side is not touching the box and the plastic side is against the box. You see? She continued to giggle. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm forever doing things like this. Oh, I can't wait to tell Tony about this when he comes down soon. You know what he'll say? He'll say, 'That sounds just like you, Mom. Are you sure you didn't do it?' My son is a right rascal." She chattered away, and for the first time in our brief meeting, I saw a shimmering of loneliness, like a stone in the back of each of her eyes, and it hit me right where it hurt. She was probably lonely enough as is, but now with this whole lockdown thing, well, it could only have gotten much worse. "Would you... I don't want to take you away from anything, but do you want to help me unpack?" "It would be my pleasure." I smiled from my heart, and not a step less shallow. "I'll put the kettle on." I stayed for hours. Mrs. Margaret Willis is 82. She married a bartender called Tony at 19. The rest is history. And what a history it was. Friends and enemies, the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows, the stolen kisses, the chance meetings, the oceans and its deserts and all its beautiful betrayals. Everything but what's beyond the atmosphere itself this woman had lived. When Tony, the husband, met an untimely death, Mrs. Willis was a couple of months pregnant, and so later down the line, Tony, the son, was born. All day, I'd been thinking about the tales she'd told me a week ago about her life, knowing my arduous shift in this unforgiving heat was almost done. In fact, over the last few days, it had really stepped it up. Spring was on the verge of bursting and intended to enter with a searing wave of inescapable light. I was having none of it, but as I pulled up to 24B, I began to feel a buzz, as if I were a child visiting the grandma I never had. But this time there was no warm and cheeky grin at the window. This time I was greeted by a shimmering blue BMW, the kind of car that turns heads, not because it makes a loud enough noise to blow out eardrums, but because it has you thinking, can that thing fly? It looked immense, like something a secret agent would boast about over cocktails. I half expected it to fire a rocket at me for daring to park behind it. "That's Tony's," Mrs. Willis chimed from around the side of her hedge, her tone deflated and grim but still aiming for happy. I put her sadness to the back of my mind, buried it behind my walls. Maybe I imagined it. I found myself staring blankly at the sheet, then at the box, then at the sheet again. I approached her while angling the box slightly towards her. "Margaret, I'm really sorry. I think they've given you the wrong box. Let me just go back and—" But she cut me off. "Oh, no, sweetheart." She didn't look directly at me, fixated at the ground to my left. "That's mine." The contrast was undeniable. During our lovely talk over red berry tea, she'd talked to me about how she wouldn't go near Coke, rots you from the inside, she'd said, let alone energy drinks, which I'm not sure she even really understood. But not only that, there wasn't a single ingredient on this list. No food for such a proud and seasoned cook to work her magic on. I lowered to a near whisper, confused. "These are your 10 cans of Red Bull, are they, Margaret? Your bottles of bull?" "Yes." Just then, a stomping came from down the hall, like a sloppy march. "Nah, mate. Tell 'em to folk off. If they're not gonna buy, they're not gonna buy. Hold on a minute." He put the phone down and turned to me. "Who the folk are you? Why are you in my house? Are you harassing my mom? She's 82, you know." The flurry of questions winded me like a jackhammer to the belly. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Just aimless head movements and gawping like a malfunctioning robot fish. But before anyone could really register a thing, he's making commands. "Give us those, then. They're ours, not yours." I placed the box on the floor and stepped away from it. He's there in a flash, his slim-fitting suit caked in sweat and drenched in fragrance that left my nose feeling violated, like it had been drowned in bleach. "Oh, for folk's sake, Mom. I wanted at least 10 minimum. You're so fucking incompetent." Margaret forced a chuckle. I felt sick. "Good thing you took this in, babe. Mum's too weak to do it herself, but folk in hell, do you have an arse on you?" He snorted a couple of laughs that had him wheezing, his face reddening, blood boiling, full of slick and viscous hatred, glaring my body up and down. Excuse me." I found myself snapping at him, my mind finally kicking into gear, the shock abandoning me to be replaced by adrenaline, leaving me sharper, readier. I'd been here before. I never wanted to go here again, but here we are. Push had come to shove. Another man in my face, wanting to hurt those around him. "You stupid fucking—" He clenched his fist and brought it to the air. He left the room. "He's not usually like this, sweetie. It's just, work. And having to come here to help me, and well, gosh, he's changed even since yesterday. What if you caught him on a bad day, and I mean really fucking bad day?" Derek angled, making sure to scoop me up in his arms to drive his point home in the comfiest way he knew how. "Derek, I know what I saw. I know something just isn't right there. That wasn't an argument. Well, it was, but it was worse. He looked like he was going to hit me. He was out of control. Derek stared at the ceiling in thoughtful silence. He didn't actually do it, though, did he? I rolled around to lay on my stomach. You weren't there. You have no idea what he's like, trust me on this. I'll take your word for it. You said it yourself, though. Mrs. Willis said it was work stress. And with that car, the guy probably does some foking high-stakes shit, right? He tightened his grip even further. He just didn't want me to leave the bed, and I knew it. I was about to give in, kiss him or something, just relax properly for the first time since that event. Maybe even float off into a sound recuperative sleep, just bury the whole thing behind my walls. Maybe this'll be the event that finally gets me into at least trying therapy. This could be a real turning point. Then I got a text from Margaret which read, "Hello, sweetheart. I know it's late, but I could really use a delivery right now from my friend Ada." I jolted up so fast, I almost put my back out. "Foking what? What?" Derek sputtered. I threw my phone at his chest and flailed about my room like a deer on ice, yanking any old item of clothing from anywhere I could find it. Yesterday's leggings, oversized jumper from the wash basket, slip-ons. Holy folk, Derek breathed. I took it he'd read the text, as the next thing he did was fling himself out of bed much in the same way I did, reaching for his gown. "You direct. I'll drive," he shouted, halfway out of the door. I followed immediately. When we got there, 24B was swallowed in the black nothingness of night. Not a single light on, no faces at any windows, all curtains closed. Derek strode up to the front door and slammed his fist against it again and again and again. "Hello, Margaret?" Unfortunately, the only lights that went on were down the road. A cat left the scene. Too much noise. A couple came out in face masks, staring us down. We tried all night, but nothing. Days later, I got 2 texts from Margaret's number, which read, "All right, we could do with some more Red Bull and a couple of proper good bin bags. 0932. Sweetheart. 0933. I couldn't go back. So why am I telling this story now? Well, I was watching the TV, just like I intended for today, and an elderly woman's body found buried behind the outer wall of Peace Gardens. Margaret Willis was found dead and wrapped in bin bags. The man responsible is Philip Hammond, who took the identity of Mrs. Willis's son Tony days before the murder. Police are also looking for Derek Hammond, nephew of Philip Hammond. Derek obtained personal information about Margaret Willis and aided his uncle heavily, or so we believe. If you have any information on their whereabouts, please call our station or 999. I'm transported back to that night. You direct, I'll drive. Derek never intended to get there in time. He's in the shower now. I'm going to try to leave before he gets out. I won the lottery back in 1998. $8 million to be precise. As a construction worker originating from an underprivileged household, this changed all of our lives. You've probably heard of those millionaires who lost everything because of drugs or stupidity, but I wasn't one of them. My only passion was reading books. I was an avid reader of everything, from novels to, you guessed it, financial literature. Those helped me make the right decisions to live off my winnings. I got to keep about $5 million after taxes, of which I invested 90% and kept 10% to use as I pleased. Afterwards, my rule was to never touch a penny from my investments and only live off my yearly interest. It worked out perfectly. My total lack of interest in luxury helped a lot. Being a 24-year-old bachelor, the only extravagance I allowed myself was good food. Construction workers burn tons of calories, and when you don't have the cash, It's cheaper to prepare the same bland meals every day. That's why I dreamed of savoring diverse meals if I ever became rich. And so, my wish had been fulfilled. New day, new restaurant, new dishes, moussaka, pizza, couscous, sushi, foie gras, colent, paella, egusi soup, you name it. I tried everything for 1 year straight. That's when I settled with French food for a while. Fancy French cuisine. With time, plates became larger with smaller servings, yet prices kept rising. Not that I cared, I was a millionaire. My favorite place by far was a Michelin-starred restaurant called L'œuf, le veuf, et le bœuf. I was told it means the egg, the widow, and the beef. I'll never understand the French. Anyway, since I went there every single day, I became acquainted with the chef, Michel. Surprisingly, he was only 36 years old and far more skilled than many older chefs I'd ever met. His signature dish was his pork aux champignons. I'd eaten similar ones around town, but no one came close to Michel's. Succulent, savory, ambrosial pork chops, with exquisite mushroom sauce cascading down the meat. It was to die for. How many times had I begged for the recipe and the origin of that tender meat so I could get it prepared at home? Of course, he wouldn't tell. Not even when I offered him 20 grand for it. Yes, that's how much I was in love with that recipe of his. The more he refused, the more I grew stubborn. I wanted to find out his supplier and his method to transform raw meat into a banquet for kings. Occasionally, I caught a glimpse of a man delivering bags of food from his dark van. The strange thing was that he only came at night. After I saw the same man stop at other restaurants in the morning, I simply supposed it was Michel's preference, or perhaps the van driver's schedule. One night, as I walked to the toilet, I heard a commotion from within the kitchen. The waiters were busy, and the angle of the hallway kept me hidden from sight. Instead of doing my business, I slipped inside the kitchen. I had been there previously when asking Michel for specific advice on chef knives, even though I never cooked for myself. I crouched out of sight behind one of the metallic counters. From there, I caught a glimpse of Michel's chef's toque and the top of another person's head. They were in the middle of a heated argument. "Ah, you exasperate me," he said, throwing his hands in the air. Then he flung something at the wall, shattering it into 100 pieces. "I've warned you before. I cannot accept food in such a state of decay. Do not ever dare to make my kitchen malodorous again. Understand?" The other person silently nodded. Michel's hat disappeared below the counter. I heard a rummaging noise and a soft whisper from the other person. "No, I need this tonight," said Michel hotly as his hat popped back up. "I have clients, important clients, who need my delicious pork chops. You find me another one by the hour, or your head will fly." The man bowed and zipped up the bag, leaving through the back door. That was my cue to discreetly leave the kitchen and go to the toilet. First, I thought that Michel was admirable to refuse pungent meat. Then I wondered what he meant by "in such a state of decay." Did it mean that he'd accept partly decaying meat? His food never made me sick, so I assumed that he must have misspoken, since he had a noticeable French accent. I finished my meal but didn't mention what I heard and returned home afterwards. The following days, I decided to dine somewhere else. Michel's heated argument with the supplier had been gnawing at my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder whether I had been eating expired food all this time. I couldn't ask Michel, of course, because I'd blow my cover and he'd either get angry or deny it. Maybe both. Despite eating well in other restaurants, my yearning was insatiable. I was back at L'œuf, le veuf, et le bœuf within a week. Michel came out of the kitchen with a broad smile on his lips. "Ah, my dear friend," he said, opening his arms to embrace me. "What happened? I thought my cuisine had offended you." No, no, of course not. I forced myself to laugh, giving a slight tap on each other's back. I just wanted to try something else, Vietnamese cuisine, for instance. Oh, you cheated on me with lean. I cannot believe this. He jested dramatically as he did. We exchanged a few more pleasantries, and he escorted me to my table. The usual pork chops with a glass of Chateau Lac Benin? I think I'll take the lobster bisque today. Michel raised a brow, but quickly dropped it back. Are you certain, monsieur? Today's pork chop is one of the best I've ever made. I automatically eyed the menu, and after a brief moment of hesitation, I said, Fine, I'll get the pork chop then. They were so good, I really couldn't resist. After all, what if they were a little expired? Weren't they the best pork chops in the world? Besides, they've never made me sick, have they? Dinner was served, and one bite was enough to dispel any doubts. Nothing could rival Michel's culinary talents. I was more determined than ever to track his supplier. The following night was a Friday, which means supplier day. I rented a black car and waited at a distance from the restaurant. When the van left, I followed from afar. He drove from restaurant to restaurant until he finished his round at 4 a.m. I tailed him through the highway, always in different lanes and ensuring at least 2 cars were between us. He exited onto a countryside road where I had to increase the gap between us because cars were few and far between, until he entered an industrial complex. The van stopped in front of a large garage door. I took out my binoculars. I came prepared and raised them to my eyes. A dozen men were charging bags into different vans. Forklifts carried pallets with boxes. Trucks loaded containers. It was a large enterprise. A car suddenly left the site, so I drove off, eager to return the following day. I was nestled under the cover of a tree row along a small road. My car was parked further away than the night before, but at a better vantage point. Nothing could escape my binoculars from here. The workers were as busy as before, carrying stuff from here to there, just like at a normal factory. A dark gray van had arrived, same model as the suppliers, except it had different number plates. Out of the cargo compartment emerged 2 men and a woman blindfolded. They were walked to the entrance when one of them tried to run away. He was quickly apprehended and pushed inside. I began to fear what this was all about. Intrigued, I waited for nightfall so I could be concealed by the dark. Since no one came through the countryside road, I left my car parked where it was and walked straight to the factory through shrubs and bushes. I must admit that I was scared to death, but my urge to receive answers was much stronger than my fear. The last bit of land was an uneven field, which helped me crawl unseen. I hid inside a bush wall separating the field and the factory road. My dark clothes likely helped to keep me concealed, as I was a mere 40 feet from the garage door. I waited until my wristwatch indicated midnight, which is when another van arrived. 2 more blindfolded men were sent through the garage side door. There was a narrow window on top of the door, so I took my chances. With nobody left or right, I dashed behind a large container left of the hangar and rapidly shifted to the side door. I am quite tall, yet I was barely able to peep through the window. Most of the hangar was filled with totaled cars and crates. The 2 blindfolded men laid flat on a table. Their hands and feet were bound, heads sticking out. Below their head was a big tray. 3 workers held the blindfolded man down, while another one approached with a knife. I averted my eyes the moment I saw it near the man's throat. I jerked my head back, heart pounding. No one around. I hurried to the end of the container with long, silent strides, scanned my surroundings, and when the coast was clear, I dashed back to the shrubs. From there, I sneaked carefully to my car and left for my hotel. There was no way this could be true. It was too horrible. Then again, I hadn't seen the action itself. They couldn't have killed that man, could they? This whole ordeal was too surreal, and my brain was still in full denial. But I had to know the truth, so I stalked Michelle's restaurant once again and waited for the van. When the delivery man carried a bag inside the restaurant and shut the back doors close, I left my car and ran towards the van's trunk. As usual, it had been left unlocked. Within, elongated brown bags, similar to the one he had brought inside, were surrounded by ice boxes. I took a deep breath and carefully unzipped the top of one of them. I uttered a cry when I saw a white face. I dared to touch the body's cheek. Ice cold. I immediately zipped the bag, closed the door, and retreated to my car just in time for the restaurant's back door to open. The delivery man dragged another bag inside. I felt sick that I had eaten people, sick that such evil existed in this world. But that wasn't the end of it. Oh, no. My youthful indignation urged me to confront Michelle. I waited in my rental car for the last customers to leave. Next, I knocked on the back door. One of the broad-shouldered cooks with a black mustache opened and said, "What?" Is Michelle there?" I asked sheepishly. He scowled and slammed the door. It was so abrupt I didn't know whether to knock again or leave immediately, so I stayed there perplexed. 20 seconds later, Michelle's familiar face promptly welcomed me in and locked the door. Mustache Man was near the other door, arms crossed, looking cross. Michelle let me sit on a stool facing him and away from Mustache Man. "It is rather unusual for you to come after service," said Michelle, narrowing his eyes slightly. "Is there a problem?" "I have a question." "Yes?" "It's about... I saw the van and the delivery person. There was a bag, and I couldn't find the right words." "You have looked inside?" Michelle asked me, casually. I averted my eyes. Michelle abruptly jumped up. "Basil, none!" he yelled at the man behind me. I snapped my head back and saw Basil swiftly hiding something behind his back. "Source," Michelle asked him to leave. "Now that we are alone," Michelle began, placing his index on his lips as he snuck to the front door. He did not end his phrase. Instead, he flung the metallic door open and Basil nearly fell out. Michelle shouted in quick French at Basil before slamming the door shut. "Always eavesdropping, this asshole," he said, returning in front of me. "Now, I'm not going to turn around the casserole, as we say in France. I will be straightforward with you, okay?" "Okay," I gulped. "The only reason you are still here is because I see you as more than a customer. Not a friend, but not a customer either. You've also spent a lot of money on my establishment, which plays in your favor." He closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. "It's a shame you found out about my operation, but it is what it is. This whole business is managed by shady people you don't want to cross." "I've seen that," I blurted out, immediately slapping my hands against my mouth. "Oh, non." Michelle closed his eyes again, then grabbed one of his kitchen knives. "Don't tell me you have followed the van man." Sorry." The creases on his face deepened. "You have the option to either leave the state and never come back, or end up on tomorrow's special menu. What will you do?" He leaned with his elbows on the kitchen table, knife in hand. Michelle's furious look made him almost unrecognizable. Do I have to leave the state?" "Up to you to listen to sound advice or not," he scowled. "Speaking of which, don't you dare speak of this to anyone because I will know, and the world isn't big enough to hide from me." I understood. A trickle of sweat dropped from my temple. Michelle stood up and placed the knife on the table. "Very well, my friend. Now please, hug me and let me bid you farewell." His wide-open arms were as inviting as a lion's mouth. I hesitated, but ended up embracing him, feeling I had no choice. In our embrace, my eyelids were firmly pursed together, anticipating a backstab at any second. 10 long seconds later, he let go of me and grabbed my shoulders. "I am very sorry you found out. I never had a customer as charming as you, and I doubt I'll ever have another one like you." Maybe it was my imagination, but his eyes seemed watery, so I said, "So am I. I will miss," I wanted to say, "your cuisine," but then I remembered that it had never been pork. "You too." He gave me a bittersweet smile and opened the back door. "Don't trail," he warned. "If possible, leave tonight and get your stuff another day." Needless to say, I did as exactly as told, and rode with my rental car near the state's border, where I stayed at a hotel. The next morning, I drove 2 states away and lived in hotels until I found a new place and got my sister to send all my stuff from the old apartment. The only real inconvenience was that my family had to visit me instead of the other way around. I had convinced them that a bad breakup was the reason for my sudden change of heart, and that everything about my city and my state reminded me of her. They called me pathetic, which was a lot better than being cooked by a French chef. I've recently looked up the restaurant and it seems to have closed long ago. Strangely, I don't harbor any ill feelings about my encounter at all. It did freak me out and turned me off pork chops for life. In a weird way, though, I still wish I could enjoy Michelle's dish one last time. I write this now as my memories have been faltering rapidly for the past few months. It's funny, you never think you'll wind up married to a clown. Yet there I was, at the age of 30, catering for some brat's 8th birthday party. The mother stood at the far edge of the fancy garden and introduced Mr. Giggles to a chorus of cheers. From behind the lunch counter, I watched as my future husband made doves disappear with a flourish of his hands and juggled behind his back. Around him, the children sat in a little semicircle, roaring with laughter. After the performance, Mr. Giggles wandered over to me, introducing himself as Johnny, and asked for a cheeseburger. "That was quite a show," I said, slipping a beef patty into a bun. I remember thinking he looked kinda cute, you know, beneath the face paint and rainbow wig. "Thanks," he said, still breathless from the pratfalls. "I've been workshopping some new material. I used to have this bit with an angry hand puppet, but kids these days hate hand puppets. Go figure." Johnny, unlike his character, came across as shy and soft-spoken. Every so often, kids hopped up on fizzy drinks and chocolate cake, stormed over and asked for an encore, and each time Mr. Giggles sprung to life, pulling coins out of ears or squirting water from the flower on his lapel. That infectious enthusiasm is what warmed my heart, I think. Fast forward 6 years, and the entire groom party, all professional clowns, pulled up to our wedding in a single Mini Cooper. That should have been a sign. Now, here's a recipe for one strained marriage. Take 2 independent contractors, mix in a lockdown, season with overdue mortgage payments, and voila! Johnny crammed all his equipment inside the spare room at the back of the house. One afternoon, while passing the outside hallway, I heard a hushed conversation from behind the door. I forced myself to walk on by. I didn't want to be that partner. But these encounters kept happening, and I couldn't bite down on my suspicions forever. I finally knocked on the door one afternoon. After some nervous shuffling, a case seemed slammed closed, and Johnny opened the door with a short, nervous smile that showed too many teeth to be genuine. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, glancing past his shoulder. Rudimentary furniture and gag props lay scattered about. "Just an old colleague," he replied, cracking the fingers on his right hand and flexing his wrist like shaking out an ache. "Oh, which one?" I pressed. Years earlier, he'd mentioned a woman he performed with as a duo. Dan, he said quickly. You never met him. He moved to Australia years ago. His vague, non-committal answers left an unpleasant gnawing sensation in the pit of my stomach, but I trusted him. A few months later, I got hired as head chef at Blue Chicago, one of the city's most popular restaurants. Suddenly, money wasn't so tight, but Johnny's restless sleep patterns worsened. Every time I drifted off, rogue digits jabbed me in the throat. I considered asking him to consult a therapist about his money anxieties. One evening, while I chopped tomatoes in the kitchen, he wandered in. "Is that a new knife?" he asked, his tone accusatory. I held the blade up to the light. "Yep, it's as willing. I got the whole set. Thought I'd treat myself since the Christmas bonus came through." I pointed at the wooden display stand on the counter. "How much did it cost?" Johnny's voice rose slightly. "Don't worry, we can afford it," I replied. His constant questioning of every purchase had grown tiresome. "Ruth, children's entertainment is in a slump. I haven't had a booking for weeks. My finances are stretched thin." "Maybe if you took that Amazon delivery job," I mumbled. "Oh, you want me to quit clowning? Is that it?" His voice cracked like his knuckles. "Nobody said you have to quit. Maybe just get a real job for a little while to—" "Real?" he asked, offended. I'd taken a cheap shot at his passion, one I didn't really mean. Believe me, I loved being married to a clown. But at that moment, Johnny pulled my strings in a bad way. As he stormed out, I followed. "Oh, are you off to tell her what I said?" "Who?" "Your ex-girlfriend. What was her name? Brandy? Bonnie?" He crossed the threshold of his inner sanctum and turned to stab the air with his finger. "You're crazy. Then who are you talking to all the time? Why all the smoke and daggers?" Johnny sighed. "There are parts of my life you'll never understand, Ruth. The clown world's complicated." Not rolling my eyes took a hero's effort. "If you and your mystery woman enjoy each other's company so much, why not run off and join the circus?" Visibly hurt, he slammed the door in my face. For days, Johnny practically lived in that spare room. Strange sounds rang out, scuffles, scraping furniture, muffled voices. But any time I snuck along and pushed my ear to the door, the room lowered its voice. For all I knew, there was a corpse stashed in there. Maybe Bonnie had moved in right under my nose. One Saturday, he got a last-minute call to fill in at a company picnic. After almost stepping on his phone, I checked it. Nothing suspicious. Just tedious shop talk with colleagues. Guilt washed over me. Was his behavior suspicious? Most definitely. But I'd jumped to conclusions and invaded his privacy. Wanting to make amends, I decided a romantic dinner would spice things up. At work that night, an idea came to me. Something cheesy, but heartfelt. Over the next few days, I worked on a little project in secret. On the big night, Johnny arrived home late. My gift lay on the counter, wrapped in a box. The dining room lights were dimmed, candles lit. "What's all this?" he asked flatly. "I thought we could have a romantic meal," I said, smiling. "Honey-roasted tenderloin, your favorite." "Okay," he said, disappearing into his room again. How long did it take to change? The tenderloin was cold by the time I heard the voices. A row this time. Curious, I crept to the door and listened. "No, it's just a crummy dinner. Of course I care about you," Johnny said. Eager to catch him red-handed, I burst through the door. What I saw froze me. Johnny wasn't speaking on the phone. Instead, he was arguing with a Raggedy Ann-style puppet with red curls and a French beret. Light reflected off its button eyes as Johnny stammered, "We've been talking, me and Mr. Giggles." The puppet swiveled toward me. "We don't care for the way you've been talking about clowns." it said, voice climbing octaves. My husband had completely snapped. Before I could react, the puppet, or Johnny, lunged at me. What followed was a terrifying scuffle, ending with Johnny sobbing, Bonbon shrieking, and me clutching a puppet of my own, saying, "Johnny, I love you, both of you." For one brief moment, sanity seemed to prevail. But Bonbon's control broke him again. In desperation, Johnny pinned his own arm and plunged a butcher knife into the limb, severing his ties with the puppet forever. As paramedics arrived, Johnny, pale and weak, looked up at me. "Things really got out of hand there, huh?" he whispered. Despite the trauma, I let out a tearful chuckle. Ever the entertainer. I'm not too ashamed to admit that the advancement of technology and our ever-increasing ease of access to it has made me a little lazy. I can't be the only one. So many of the things we used to need to put pants on for are now right at our fingertips. Want some groceries? Boom! Postmates or Instacart will hand-deliver anything you want from the store. Want some greasy fast food, but don't want to wait in line while the person in front of you has to feed 300 people? Well, have someone from DoorDash or Grubhub go through that nonsense for you. Need to get somewhere, but your car is in the shop and public transportation is the absolute worst? Well, jump right into an Uber or a Lyft. Well, for these, you might still want to consider throwing some pants on. That is just scratching the surface. New ones are popping up nearly daily, trying to find their niche in the market. Not to mention, you can just order almost anything that exists in this world from Amazon. It's only a matter of time before they figure out transdimensional gateways and can grab anything you want from any reality. So, it was fairly easy for me to fall into this trap of spending a few extra dollars to give myself some convenience. I'm not rich by any means, but when it's 9 and I just don't feel like cooking or going out, I turn on my phone and can get virtually whatever I want to eat. Within this market, DoorDash is the trap I fell hardest into. It was never much more expensive than taking care of it myself, and other apps like Grubhub didn't offer as much variety. It'll be at least once a week that I'll watch that little car icon getting closer to my house, stomach rumbling in response. As much as I love the app, though, I won't be using it anymore. Like I said, almost every week I order food, but 2 weeks ago I suffered a pretty serious injury during a car crash. One I'm still recovering from. So all these apps that before acted as a means of convenience became something of a necessity as I could drive or even leave the house. I, of course, wasn't ordering food every day. I wish that was the kind of money I had. When the pain was bad and I wasn't willing to cook, I didn't hesitate to order, though. I had used the service enough to get embarrassingly familiar with some of the drivers. So I first noticed things were a little off when Martha, a woman I talk to often, popped up as my driver, which was no surprise. The surprise came when I was alerted that my food had arrived. I made my way through the house slowly due to my injuries, and upon opening the door, it wasn't her. Instead, I peered into bright blue eyes that were shaded by an orange baseball cap. The man that stood in front of me lifted the bag of food and flashed a smile. Cautiously, I lifted my arm out and grabbed the plastic. Hearing the bag wrinkling during the transaction, I attempted to look beyond the broad delivery man. I could see Martha's car by the curb and her familiar silhouette in the passenger seat. The man noticed my nervous gaze and informed me she injured her leg. He looked at the cast on mine and jested that I and she had that in common before wishing me a good day and walking away. I tried to wave at Martha, but assumed she might have fallen asleep when she didn't return the gesture. She was an older woman after all. Not much thought was put into it at the time, and any concerns I might have had were wafted away by the warm odor lifting off the bag. Pulling the plastic handles, my order gift was revealed to me. When I'm feeling down, nothing cheers me up more than a well-made steak and cheese. As the hefty sub was freed from its sleeve, I heard something fall to the floor. The sound was fairly distinct, and the picture in my senses matched perfectly with what laid on the carpet. A shining gold link bracelet, leaning over my fingers wrapped around the metal that was heated from the sub. With an open palm, I observed the jewelry to make sure it wasn't mine, but I didn't own anything like it. Quickly, I opened the app and contacted the customer service. They got back to me before I could get one bite in. What followed was a fairly brief conversation between me and the representative. My conclusion was that it belonged to Martha, and when she made sure all the food was there, it dropped off her wrist. The rep told me they would contact the driver and get back to me when we could take further steps. So I let that be that and went to eat my food. Nothing was wrong with it, other than it being a little colder than it should have been. The place was only a few minutes away, but I was so hungry I barely noticed. The following 2 days I managed, with the help of some pain pills, to make my dinners, but when the next day came around I went on DoorDash once again. Ordered some food from a local Chinese place and saw that Martha was once again delivering my food. Customer service never got back to me, so I figured I would just return it then. So when I swung my front door open again to greet her, I was a little thrown off when I was met by the same man again. I tried how taken aback I was and instead pulled the bracelet from my pocket and held it out towards him. His face scrunched up as I explained that it must have fallen off Martha's wrist a few days ago. He stared at me for a moment, and I watched his mouth repeating the letter M before his eyes when wide with realization. With a laugh, he replied that Martha wanted me to have the bracelet. As he spoke, I couldn't help but notice something poking out of the bag of food he was holding. It prompted me to assert that I would like to thank Martha for the gift. His glance shifted quickly from me to the car running by the curb. When his body twisted to look back, I noticed the car wasn't Martha's. Somehow, over the rumblings in my abdomen, I was able to feel my heart thudding against my chest. When his bright eyes locked onto mine again, he explained that he was just running DoorDash orders for her so she could keep making rent. It sounded plausible, but the longer the words sat with me, the stranger they became. Not so much what he said, but how it was said. Like someone who was having trouble remembering a movie script, so they just filled in the blanks. With my nerves sitting firmly on edge, I told him to thank her for me and quickly grabbed the food. My goodbyes were offered through an ever-shutting door, and only with the click of the lock did my heart begin to settle. Part of me was in overdrive, attempting to convince myself that I was just overreacting. It got harder to do as I reached into the plastic bag covered in drops of condensation and wrapped my fingers around what had set me off. I had ordered from that place a few times, and I was pretty damn certain no orders, DoorDash or otherwise, had come with a rose before. My intention wasn't to hurt Martha's ability to make money, but I was getting nervous and contacted their support again. The person who responded to me acted just as confused as I was. They said they couldn't give me any specific or personal details, but Martha's account had some suspicious patterns. I'm sure the individual wasn't even supposed to say that much, but was instead just looking out for me. The person said they'd continue to look into it and told me to contact them again if Martha ever became my driver again. After the second incident occurred, I had no intentions of ordering from DoorDash again. I talked to a few friends about the incident over the next few days, cooked food for myself, even on the rough days, and waited, hoping their customer service would alleviate my nerves. When I calmed down almost a week after receiving the rose that was packed in with 2 servings of orange chicken, I fell getting out of the shower. Pain radiated intensely through my body. I went from scorching hot water to a blinding burn, pulsing from my injured leg, and any thought of the dinner I was about to make was washed away. Nervously, I pressed through the list of restaurants and fast food joints on DoorDash, picking through any new addition to the lineup. I decided I would order something far away, Both orders before were pretty local, so I figured if I broke the pattern up, no problem. My food was ordered, a burger and fries from someplace I didn't even know existed, and I waited until a dasher confirmed my order. The screen flickered and I let out a sigh when I saw the name Marcus appear on the screen. All I had to do was wait and kick back with a handful of pain pills and I would be chowing down in no time. I had nearly fallen asleep when my phone buzzed to alert me that my food had arrived. It was running early, something I saw as a blessing at the time. I hobbled over to the door assisted by the crutches under my arms. Clumsily, I turned the handle and pulled the door open. Bright blue was all I saw, like my vision tunneled in on those piercing eyes. My hand moved to push the door closed, but it was hard to put any real force behind it in my state, and his hand easily stopped my attempt. He smiled and said that he was worried that he scared me, explaining that he was Martha's grandson. He went on to tell me that she had gotten sick and the hospital bills started piling up, so he started driving for her. Soon, she had to stay home, and when he last delivered to me, customer service contacted him after. They said he had to make his own account if he wanted to keep driving because people are put off when the driver doesn't match. The words were smooth, like he sat outside my house and practiced them to sound more natural than last time. He went on to admit that he thought I was pretty, so he was nervous and the flower was just a silly misstep. Such a genuine smile was contorted by the words coming out of his mouth, and I let my guard be dropped. I returned his smile, and a laugh broke out between the two of us as I went over how ridiculous the whole thing was. When there was enough silence to do so, he took a look at the gleaming metal crutches and offered to set the food down inside for me. No flowers this time, he joked, lifting the bag to my eye level. With a nod, I backed away from the door and allowed him to begin stepping inside. I'm not invincible against a nice smile and blue eyes, and I felt bad being so suspect to the guy. He asked where I wanted the food, and I pointed to the kitchen counter. As he started walking towards it, I felt my pocket buzzing and awkwardly reached around the crutches to get my phone. The walls of my living room felt like they were closing in when I read the text I had received from my friend. I had told her about the DoorDash incident, and it had made her curious, so she looked up Martha's name. She came across a recent news article with the name Martha in it. An elderly woman was found deceased in her car near a public park. But the article wasn't mainly about Martha. They were using her death to compare with another individual that was found dead just the day before. My hand nearly cracked the screen when I read the name of the recently deceased man. Marcus. "You okay?" The voice that was once smooth as butter, the voice that just a minute before had calmed me down, sounded like the devil himself. I didn't move my head, but my gaze shifted to the stranger standing in my living room. I thought it odd that he wouldn't have tried to put himself between me and the door, but once he saw my crutches, it must not have concerned him. With trembling lips and a bubbling ire, I commanded him to leave my house. He just laughed, not like he did when we shared a laugh. This was something else entirely. "Come on, I just got here," he replied. His voice was so in control. I barely had time to register his intentions when I felt a sudden pressure on my face. There was no warning or wind-up, just his fist slamming hard against my nose and me falling against the door, shutting it. My body crumbled to the floor, legs so completely unable to support my weight. All I could do was look up at him. He had his hands over his face, and with shaking breath he pulled them down, stretching his features. "I'm so sorry, I've been waiting for this," he said, flashing that smile again, but I knew what was behind it then. It was warped. "Let's just eat our food and we can talk." He continued. Each word sounded like he was either going to start laughing or crying. I lifted my arm and pointed towards my bedroom, telling him that we can eat in there. His grin bore his fangs, and he walked over to me. When I thought he might drag me over, he instead grabbed my crutches and phone away from me. I had no intention to fight him on that. Living alone as I do, being a girl like I am, my dad taught me many things. 2 of them stuck with me more than anything else, though. The first was that people can be horrible. Even though my body was weak and the man's assault had thrown me to the floor, it was nothing compared to what my old man would do to me. Watching the man turn his back to me, my food, means of mobility and cell phone in his hand, I remembered the second thing, something I never hoped I would need to know. Yes, my daddy taught me people were terrible by being terrible, but he was a cop who had seen much worse people than him, and he taught me, no matter how terrible a person is, they all get shot just the same. My fingers squeezed twice on the heavier than I remembered handgun. 2 hard cracks echoed around my home, and the man stopped in his tracks. Patches of dark red painting around the holes in his light orange sweater. Bastarded didn't even turn to look at me, just stood for a moment and ended up dropping to the floor. It took me a minute, but I was able to crawl over to my phone and ring the police. I wasn't worried about getting in trouble. They knew me pretty well. They were even happy to see me. After a car T-boned my cruiser and took me out of commission, I would get letters from the boys. My friend, who had sent me the message that alerted me in the first place, was the first to arrive on the scene. Then a few others got there, and it was pretty staggered from there on out. Statements and questions. I was just happy I wasn't the one who needed to do all the paperwork on this one. Once the individual was identified, pieces started to connect. Martha's and Marcus' cases got fast-tracked and solved shortly after. This leg is still giving me a hard time, but it's getting better. I can walk without the crutches and I'm back to driving. I think I'll be doing a bit more of that from now on, and I certainly don't see myself using DoorDash anytime soon. Be careful out there, folks, and enjoy your food. So, with the holidays coming up, everyone is thinking about how fat and miserable they'll feel by the new year. You know how it goes. It starts innocently with a fun-sized Snickers bar, or 2, or 5, while loading up the treat bucket. Then the kids go trick-or-treating, and you suddenly have a boatload of delicious, potentially razor-blade stuffed goodies that must be inspected for safety. Oh look, Skittles, I'm going to taste the rainbow. Then comes pre-Thanksgiving. That's right, I said pre. This is the time when everyone is shaking the rust off their mediocre baking skills, and suddenly the office is inundated with peanut butter fudge, rum balls, and peanut brittle. Damn, I love peanut brittle. Just one more piece. Just break off a small one. Oops, didn't break off, and now I've touched the entire chunk. I have to eat it. Frank's grandmother baked all of this, and she's really old. It could be her last holiday season, you know. This brittle can't go to waste. Then, Thanksgiving at the office, catered and loaded with all the goodies. Oh no, we've accidentally ordered 72 extra pies. We'll just leave them in the break room and they'll get eaten. And you know they will. Then it's the real Thanksgiving. And suddenly it's ancient Rome, again, with the whole family participating in a non-stop binge and purge cycle, or just taking a dump and coming back to the table to reload. Pre-Christmas, Christmas, New Year's parties, football games. The list goes on. And then comes self-loathing, the misery, the belly shaking in the mirror and firm resolve to get your fat ass on a diet. Mo DNA. Just cheat through the weekend and start fresh. I mean, it's only Wednesday now, but who can start a diet on Wednesday? No one, that's who. So there we were, already up to September and approaching the holiday glut at breakneck speed. After much discussion amongst my peers, we decided to get a head start on the holidays and drop some weight before the madness begins. Then, if we gain it all back, we end up okay for the year. No more guilt, shame, and negative self-talk. It all evened out. So we went for it. It was time to do this. A weight loss contest. And here we are, a few weeks into this thing. It's me, Andrea, Morgan from the collections department, Kim from shipping and receiving, my IT department cubicle neighbors Jim and Tanner, and Peggy from I don't know where. I'm not sure what Peggy's actual job is, but she sits close enough to me that I can hear pretty much everything she does. And you know what Peggy does seemingly endlessly? Eat! That girl is always shoving something down her gullet. I can't even tell you how many times I hear a chip bag opening or cellophane crinkling as she opens snack cakes and God knows what else. She's a big girl and one of those giggly types, laughing at her own comments. She reminds me of a younger version of the school secretary in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Her day is seemingly spent taking personal phone calls and giving attitude to anyone who approaches her with something work-related. I swear, it's like her only reason to be here is to eat and scroll through her Facebook feed. She's just plain annoying, and I'm looking forward to taking her $50,000. That's the game, $50 each, into a pool with the winner taking all. We do pounds lost, calculated as a percentage of body weight lost. Here are the starting numbers. Me, 167 ounces. Morgan, 186 ounces. Kim, 152 ounces. Jim, 244 ounces. Tanner, 192 ounces. Peggy, 376 lobs and counting. I bet her scale moves up non-stop. Key DNA like the power meter outside my house. So, I've been chronicling this whole adventure, and something is up. Everyone was moving along, but Peggy was crushing it. We were totally getting our asses handed to us. But now, something has changed. Something has gone wrong. I kept a log for a few weeks, so let me share some of the highlights with you, then we'll pick back up with the current situation. Diet Contest Log. Week 1, 9/16/19 to 9/20/19. MODN. A. We did our initial weigh-in today. Peggy came in at 376 pounds. I knew there was no way she would stand a chance with her eating habits. No stinking way. Then, at the end of the day, I heard her telling someone on the phone that she had already lost 3 lbs. WTF. I heard cellophane crinkling all day and watched her grating half a pound of cheese over a plate of home fries from the greasy burger place down the street. There's only one explanation for this. She must have taken a humongous dump sometime before getting back on that scale. Tuesday. I'm hungry. Morgan's hungry. Everyone is hungry. I hear the munching sounds of kale salads, raw broccoli, and carrots, and the tops popping off of low-sodium soup cans. The microwave is alive with healthy choice frozen meals, and the soda machine gently weeps. Peggy's cubicle got 2 deliveries via Grubhub. The first was Chinese, and a couple of hours later some cupcakes, half a dozen to be exact, from a gourmet place across town. Then another hour later, I heard her tear open a sleeve of Ritz crackers. How did I know they were Ritz? How do you know the sound of your own children's voices? Exactly. Wednesday. I hit the scale this morning. I'm down 2.2 lbs. I know it's just water weight at this point, but it's encouraging. The way Peggy's eating, she's screwed. Morgan is down 2 also, Kim is down 1, Tanner has dropped 3 lbs, and Jim is up 2 lbs. Poor Jim. He loves beer. Holy shit. Peggy and Kim just came back from the scales. Peggy has dropped another 6 lbs. What the hell? How is this even happening? Maybe she has a tapeworm. Where does one get a tapeworm anyway? Asking for a friend. Thursday. Peggy is killing me. This behavior will have to catch up to her soon. Just wrapped up a large meat lover's pizza all by herself. A couple hours after a Grubhub delivery of a full pancake and sausage breakfast with biscuits and gravy on the side. I don't even know where the hell she's putting all this food. Wow. Just wow. I literally right this moment am listening to her peel back the cover on a full-size bag of double-stuffed Oreos. I know that creepy sound anywhere, because I love Oreos more than life. Friday. This is insanity. Peggy and her witness just came back from the scale. Down another 6 pounds. That's 15 pounds lost this week in 4.5 days. It's no lie. I literally can see her clothes loosening up. She's shrinking. On a related note, she's been burning incense in her cubicle. I really don't mind the smell, as it reminds me of this hippie guy I dated in college, and he was always a sweetheart, although his bathing habits needed work. Anyway, she's burning the incense, and I could swear I'm hearing her whisper praying, or chanting or something. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Who knows? Over the weekend, I did some reading about strange rituals and practices. Peggy's sudden, almost supernatural weight loss had me on edge. The incense, the chants. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something sinister going on. I found forums where people spoke of weight magic, spells that supposedly allowed a person to shed pounds without the need for exercise or dieting. They required a focus object, a doll, a token, or even something as mundane as a photo. When I returned to the office on MoDNA, I noticed something odd on Peggy's desk. Among the clutter of wrappers and crumbs was a small, crudely made rag doll. It was lumpy, uneven, and oddly shaped, with what looked like a string tied tightly around its middle. The thing gave me chills. MoDNA. Peggy looked smug as she walked into the office, her clothing noticeably looser than it had been just a week ago. "Down another 10 pounds, she announced to no one in particular, though her voice carried through the office. "Wow, Peggy," Morgan said, her tone dripping with forced enthusiasm. "What's your secret?" Peggy just smiled, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Hard work and determination," she said with a giggle, but her hand absent-mindedly brushed against the doll on her desk. I couldn't let it go. When Peggy stepped out for lunch, I took my chance and crept to her desk. Up close, the doll was even more unsettling. It wasn't just string. It was wrapped in what looked like thick rubber bands, cinching its middle to an unnatural thinness. The fabric was damp, and there was a faint metallic smell to it. I shuddered and backed away before she could return. As the days passed, Peggy's rituals became more pronounced. She burned incense constantly, her whispered chants growing louder. By Thursday, the whispers had turned into a soft hum, rhythmic and hypnotic. The doll on her desk had changed too. It looked smaller, its waist impossibly thin, and the rubber bands were tighter, digging into the fabric as if compressing it further. Peggy's transformation was undeniable. She moved with an energy and confidence that seemed alien to her former self. Her face was sharper, her arms slender, and even her once bulging stomach had receded, but there was something off about her appearance. Her skin had taken on an almost translucent quality, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked drained. By Friday, I was convinced something unnatural was happening. Peggy's latest weigh-in had the office buzzing. She had lost a total of 31 pounds in just 2 weeks. It didn't make sense. "This can't be healthy," Kim whispered to me as we watched Peggy munch on a donut while laughing at her phone. "She's eating like she's preparing for hibernation and still losing weight." "It's not," I whispered back. "And I think I know why." I told Kim about the doll, about the incense, and the chanting. Her eyes widened as I spoke. "That's insane," she said, but her voice wavered. "You really think she's cursed or something?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm going to find out." "2 years ago, I died. It was nothing special, a car accident. People die all the time in car crashes. I was on my way home from work, pulling out onto the motorway, and a truck was going too fast. I know exactly what happened because my lawyer showed me the truck's dash cam footage. My car spun out, then flipped over. The roof buckled and hit my head. Both my lungs were punctured, my legs were broken, half my ribs were cracked. I was unconscious, barely alive, when the paramedics arrived. I was in the operating theater for 16 hours, and in that time I died for 95 seconds. Miraculously, the surgeons saved my life. I was in a coma for 8 months. They thought I'd never wake up, but somehow I did. First they said I'd never survive. Then they said I'd never wake up. Then they said I had irreparable brain damage. Then they said I'd never walk again. Time after time, I beat the odds. The brain is a funny thing. I should know. I'm a neuroscientist. I'm not a doctor or a brain surgeon. I do research, fMRI scans, that sort of thing. That evening, I'd been driving home from a day of interviewing people with synesthesia. That's where your senses mix with each other. You can smell sounds or taste colors. We were testing the hypothesis that people who claim to see auras are actually synesthetes. They see a person's mood through their facial expressions and body language, and their brain interprets that by overlaying colors around them. I don't know if it's true. There's a long way to go before we're ready to publish. This is to say that when I eventually persuaded the hospital to discharge me, still with a walking cane and occasional dizzy spells, I had a pretty good idea of what to expect. That still didn't prepare me for the actual experience. I'd got used to the white walls and the beeping machines of a few hospital rooms. The taxi journey home was overwhelming, made worse by arriving back to an empty house with no food and hardly any furniture. You know the bit in the wedding vows about "till death do us part." Turns out my wife had figured that 95 seconds of death still counted. She'd moved on to another guy during my 8-month vacation. I'm sure she was delighted that I was finally able to consent to selling our house. With my savings, sick pay, state benefits, and my share from the sale, I was at least able to rent a small flat. I even found a nurse, Anita, who specialized in both physiotherapy and mental health, and visited 3 times a week to check up on me, helping me with the basics while I got back on my feet. Early on, I was sleeping 18 hours a day, and was overwhelmed if I spent more than a few minutes outside. Thank goodness for Deliveroo. Over several months, I gradually recovered. I was able to walk around my apartment without holding on to the walls, and even went out shopping with Anita, and then later without her. Eventually, I convinced her to take me back into work just for a day. I was still employed there and hoped to go back part-time soon. Now, the thing with being a neuroscientist is you have easy access to brain scanners. We'd all scanned our brains a few times, and I even have a picture of my brain scan above my work desk at home. My ex-wife was at least kind enough to pack my things neatly. So, one of the first things I did after checking that they hadn't ditched my coffee mug was get a new scan. Do you know what the amygdala is? It's a pair of tiny nuggets of brain tissue, each about the shape and size of an almond. It's really important in regulating emotions, among many other things. Your brain takes in a huge amount of data, far too much to process, and your amygdala acts as a sort of pattern-matching algorithm and filter. To massively oversimplify my 2 decades of experience, there are 3 things the amygdala does when it receives data. If it perceives threatening or overwhelming stimuli, it sends you into fight-flight-freeze mode. Your limbic system takes over, and you act emotionally rather than rationally. If it detects a familiar pattern of stimuli, it invokes the part of your brain that knows how to deal with the situation at hand. This basically sends you into autopilot, and it's why you can drive to work with no real memory of the journey. And if it detects an unfamiliar but non-threatening event, it rallies your frontal lobe. This is the rational, thinking brain, and it's how we're able to learn new skills like calculus or the piano. The amygdala does a lot of filtering before actually passing along the data it decides is relevant. I've viewed images of healthy brains countless times. I've also studied plenty of brains with damage to the amygdala. I've never before seen an amygdala that looked like mine, post-crash. It certainly explained why I was still having headaches and dizzy spells. To be honest, I was worse than the doctors realized, but being a neuroscientist, I knew what lies to tell them to keep them off my back. Truth is, I could barely even focus, visually or mentally, for more than about half an hour. And now I knew why. As best I could tell, the pattern-matching role of my amygdala was functioning perfectly. The filter wasn't. The effects of this were reduced somewhat due to very high doses of psychostimulants to keep my frontal cortex active, and antipsychotics to help me moderate my emotions and reduce mental agitatio. Slowly, but faster than my doctors would have let me if I'd been honest about my symptoms. I can tell you when it started, or at least when I first noticed it, and Anita only came round once a week, and it was a Thursday. She rang the bell as normal, I opened the door as normal, she walked in as normal, with a maggot on her right cheek. You've got something on your cheek," I said, watching the 3-centimeter gray larva wriggle slightly. "Oh," Anita said, almost disinterested, and wiped her face. All she managed to do was move it slightly to the side. And then, most disturbingly, she checked in the mirror in my hall, looked satisfied, and proceeded to carry out her usual checks on me. Let me tell you, that was an uncomfortable exam. The whole time I was staring at the thing, waiting for it to inevitably fall onto me. She just acted as though it wasn't even there. Half an hour later, she'd finished her tests. I was coming along nicely, she told me, although my eyes were a little dilated. I didn't tell her that hers would be too if she'd spent 30 minutes watching a maggot crawl on somebody's face. I could have shrugged that off, especially as nothing happened for the rest of the day, and I mean nothing. 10 hours awake followed by half an hour of focused social interaction. Even though I was recovering, that took it out of me, and I went to bed, as I usually did after her visits. On Friday morning, I decided I wanted a change from my usual food. A local shop was just 10 minutes walk away, so I headed out. I wanted cereal and fruit. As I entered the shop, I braced myself for the loud bell that rang when you opened the door, something that used to annoy me even before I focused my amygdala. I didn't brace for the smell. Something putrid assailed my nostrils the moment the door opened. I gagged, spent a moment composing myself, and walked to the cereal shelves. That was fine. I grabbed a box of Frosties. Then I headed to the fruit section and found the source of the smell. The fruit was rotten. Gray and green mold covered every fruit in there. The bananas were black and mushy. "Helen," I called to the woman on the counter. "Helen, what's up with the fruit?" Helen looked over at me. "What do you mean?" "It's rotten." Helen walked out to me and inspected the shelves. She picked up a few blobs from behind a handwritten sign that insisted they were apples. Turning them over in her hands one by one, she eventually picked out 2 that looked no better or worse than the rest. "Yeah, I'll chuck these. Bring whatever you want to the counter. I'll check them for you." I only bought the cereal. I stayed in for the next few days. I could focus enough to read neuroscience papers for a couple of hours a day, broken up into short stints. Meanwhile, I made a valiant attempt to catch up on my Netflix backlog, which had been bad even before my time out from life. Nothing with subtitles, though. I couldn't quite cope with those yet. As Thursday approached, I found myself getting worried. Last week had been pretty awful, and I dreaded a repeat. Anita rang the bell just after noon, and I opened the door to her. There were no maggots. I mean, you've got to try to find the positives in life, right? Anita's clothes, usually the light blue NHS uniform, were dark and ragged. She looked like she had been dragged through a bush. But that wasn't the worst of it. She had, well, it's hard to say. It was like an outline, a sort of fuzzy black shadow surrounding her. Like I said before, I've done work on the purported phenomenon of auras, and I'd read and heard plenty of first-hand reports. This shadow looked sort of like those, but I've never heard others talk of the dread I felt emanating from this nurse. I started to tell Anita I wasn't feeling well. She walked in anyway. "This will only take a few minutes, and if you're not feeling well, it's all the more important I do a proper checkup." I really wish I could say that half hour was the most stressful time of my life. Anita didn't do anything unusual. She took my biometrics, just as before, and left. All that time, though, I was watching the shadow shift and pulsate around her. This was enough time for me to make some good scientific observations. The pulsations were roughly in time with a heartbeat, but not mine, which was racing. I can only assume they were in time with hers. I watched as parts of it flipped out into little tendrils flailing in the air. They felt cold when they touched me. After she left, still cheerful as always, I retreated to my bedroom. I put on some Netflix junk, but I wasn't really watching it. I have always had a scientific mind, and in the worrying I did, a plan started to form. I didn't leave the house for days. I read all I could about auras, the scientific papers, the spiritual stuff I've always assumed was bunk, everything. I read about the side effects of my medication and the reported effects of the specific combination, very little. And I came up with an idea. What if my specific biology, my specific injuries, and these specific medications had an unusual effect? So I came off the medication. I was already on half doses. I spent 2 days on a quarter, 2 days on an eighth, and then nothing. I didn't check with the doctors, as I already knew what they'd say. This did my headaches no good, but ordinary paracetamol helped. A couple of weeks later, after suffering through 2 more visits from Anita, I left the house. This was last Wednesday. It was early afternoon, fairly quiet with nobody around. I could see the familiar houses, a few trees, street furniture, the usual things you see on any residential street. But they were far from ordinary. The trees were rotten. The few leaves that remained were wilted and covered in fungus. Trunks and branches were split open, horrible mushroom-like things sprouting from their insides. I couldn't tell if the trees were dead, but they were far from healthy. Road signs were faded and rusting, and the road itself was degraded, covered in cracks and potholes filled with some sort of liquid. Like mud, but it looked slimy. I definitely didn't want to test this by touching it. The houses were decrepit. Many looked like they were about to fall down, and one with a "To Let" sign outside it actually had its roof caved in. One house was freshly painted, and the incongruity between the almost collapsed structure of the house and the clean paint made my head hurt. But even then, the paint was already starting to peel. If it wasn't for the fresh paint, the scene in front of me could have easily been mistaken for an abandoned street in a post-apocalyptic movie. A thought occurred to me. I went back inside, got my phone, and took a photo of the street. Looking at the photo on the screen of my phone, everything looked normal. I stood there for a long time, comparing what the phone saw and what my eyes saw. One of them was lying to me, but which one? I turned around, headed back into my house, which I now saw had crumbling walls and moss growing out of a multitude of spiderweb-like cracks, and pondered the question. Our brains are extremely powerful, capable of processing far more information than a phone camera. I believe our eyes see the world as it is, and our brain filters the input to present us with the accepted version of the world. I can no longer do that. The very particular brain damage I sustained would normally have killed a human. I could very well be the first person to suffer this specific damage, and be unlucky enough to survive with the rest of my mental faculties intact. Perhaps there were a few others like me, consigned to psychiatric institutions somewhere. I determined right there and then that I would not let myself suffer such incarceration. I'm a scientist. I experiment, observe, collect data. So that's exactly what I did. That afternoon, I took my phone, a notebook and clipboard, and walked into town. Without the helping with the filtering my amygdala used to do, I could see the real world more clearly than 2 weeks earlier. I passed a few people on the way to the shopping center. They were all surrounded by those shadowy auras, and now I could make out more definition. The auras were roughly human-shaped, covering them all over like a spacesuit, but the shape fluctuated. From the other side of the street, I didn't want to get too close, I could make out dark, translucent tendrils coming off of the auras, but the more I looked, the more I realized they were, mostly, not coming out of the people, but going into them. When I reached the shopping center, I sat down on a rarely used bench, close enough to observe people yet far enough away that few would pass near me. At lunch, people would sit on it to eat their sandwiches, but it was now nearly 4 o'clock. I made a mental note to leave before 5, to avoid the crowds. I took a few photos, but they all came out normal. My camera wasn't going to help, so instead I sketched people. I took an evening class on sketching a few years back, so I was adequately skilled. After 5 or 6 sketches, I looked back at the pictures, trying to discern any patterns. The tendrils were worming their way into people's bodies all over, but they were much more focused on the heart and the head, the source of blood and the source of our thinking. This was early April, and I'd been surprised by the number of flies buzzing around the people I sketched, but hadn't really taken much notice of them. Right then, I didn't think they were significant. I moved on to drawing the dilapidated buildings, the location of moss and mold on the road, and the abysmal state of the cars that passed by. Around 3:30, I got up and walked home. The shopping center is due west of my house, so I'd had the sun in my eyes for the walk there. It was therefore something of a surprise to see the sun on my walk back. Actually, it wasn't the sun, not the sun I'm used to anyway, about half the size and red. I turned back. Our usual yellow sun was in its proper place. If I'd seen this in the past, I'd have been shocked and bewildered. That day it was just another bit of weirdness. Had it always been there and I'd just never seen it before? I sketched the 2 suns and managed to make it the rest of the way home without any further strange things happening to me. The inside of my flat was a welcome change from the weird, rotting world outside. It's only a bedroom, living room, kitchen, and bathroom, and I'd kept up with the cleaning of one person's mess easily during the last few months. Even so, I could now see the mold and damp patches on the walls, the rotting wood of the furniture, and strange cracks along the plaster. The kitchen stank, so I threw away the copious amounts of moldy food and ordered home delivery of a load of canned and ultra-processed food, as well as lots of bottled water. The tap water was brackish and tinted brown. Anita arrived right on schedule the next day. I don't know if the shadowy aura was stronger or if I was just seeing it more clearly now. I counted 3 maggots, 1 on her face and 2 on her hair. Flies buzzed around her, and as she poked and prodded, I kept my eyes closed, grateful only for the fact that she wore sterile gloves for the examination. After 20 minutes trying not to gag due to the stench, she told me I seemed physically fine but emotionally agitated. No shit, I thought to myself. Anita arranged an inpatient appointment for the next week. I agreed just to get her to finish and leave, with no intention of actually going. TV is good. Whatever things look like in reality apparently doesn't show up on camera. I spent the rest of the day binge-watching Netflix and YouTube just to experience some semblance of normality. The next day, I made an appointment with the doctor. If I'd been taking my meds as prescribed, I would have been out that day, and it's amazing how quickly you can get an appointment when you claim your antipsychotics have run out. I drove to the GP surgery in the light of two suns, stayed in my car until the very last moment, and then went in. My doctor was running on time, hooray, and I was ushered into his office by a receptionist with skin barely clinging onto their face. I sat down opposite a short, white, balding man in a white coat, or at least, I think it was supposed to be white. The stains made it difficult to be sure. I wondered if it had been months since he had washed it, or if it had picked up all that filth in just a day or two. The doctor asked me the usual questions, and I answered them. But a refill of my medication wasn't the reason I was there. I wanted to study another person up close, and no longer felt like I trusted Anita. Also, I felt safer outside of my home, somewhere I could flee from if necessary. He had the usual aura I'd come to expect, and I watched as the tendrils snaked about him, occasionally burrowing into his skin as though it wasn't there. The skin was blemished and scarred in ways I hadn't seen before, and his face bled from 2 open sores. Several flies buzzed around him, dipping into and out of the aura and dragging it around with them. After satisfying himself with the answers to my questions, the doctor had to do a bit of work on the computer. I'd noticed that the flies were unusual, and took this opportunity to get my notebook out and sketch one of them. They were big, far bigger than any flies I've seen before, at 4 or 5 centimeters across, and the more I looked, the more they didn't quite look like flies. I studied them and completed a quick rough sketch that I could improve on later. They had black bodies with green stripes and 4 wings, so they weren't true flies. Some other sort of insect? I'm not much of an entomologist, but I know that insects all have 6 legs. These had 4 legs, and rather than compound eyes, they seemed to have 2 orb-like eyes on the end of stalks. This wasn't a combination I knew for many species. I was becoming more and more unnerved, and then I realized they do in fact have 6 limbs. 4 legs and 2 grasping limbs at the front. These things are capable of holding small objects. But what really threw me, what led me to running out of the doctor's office without a prescription, was what happened next. 2 of the flies landed on my notebook. They seemed to study the sketch I had made. Then they started buzzing. Or to be more precise, they'd been buzzing all along. Now they buzzed in what to me sounded a lot like communication. Insect buzzing comes from the wings flapping in flight, but I heard it even from the 2 that weren't flying. Then they rose up, joining the other flies, 10 or 11 of them, I think, hovering half a meter from my face and all looking at me and buzzing to each other. They'd been content to ignore me until then, but now they knew that I could see them. I ran without a word to my doctor. I got to my car and drove as fast as I could back home, not looking back to see if they were following. I reached my flat, raced inside, and started covering any hole they could possibly get through. Clothes against the doorframe, duct tape across the air vents, anything I could to seal myself in. Now, when a person runs out of their doctor's surgery in terror, it's normal to do some follow-up. When they're not taking their antipsychotic medication, it turns out the follow-up is with the police. 2 hours later, the cops turned up at my door, asking if I was okay. I hadn't done anything illegal, except possibly speeding on the way home. So I spoke to them through the glass of the window of my living room. I convinced them that I wasn't an immediate danger to myself or others, and eventually they left to make their report. Their flies did not, a dozen or so flies buzzing against my window. They dragged the shadow aura with them, tracing thick lines of it through the air as they flew. I saw some of them disappear, and assumed at first that they were trying to find another way in. No such luck. Shortly after they left, 100 more turned up. And this, I fear, is where my story ends. My food and water delivery should last me a week, maybe 2. I live almost entirely in my bedroom now, venturing out only to use the toilet and to secure the gaps where the flies have been trying to tunnel in. Between the flies and their shadow trails, I can barely see anything outside, apart from the yellow light filtering through in the daytime and the red light of the evening sun. I can barely sleep, partly because I live in constant fear, and partly because the buzzing of thousands, tens of thousands of flies is overwhelming. So, with nothing else to do, I'm posting my account to the internet. As if that will do any good. The best I can hope for now is that I run out of food and starve to death. I don't want to know what happens to me if they get in while I'm still alive. This particularly uninteresting Friday, with the outside temperature reaching up to 90 degrees, I decided to avoid cooking, and instead order something. How about Chinese? My new roommate, Nick, suggests. He moved in with me last week after my old roommate moved out due to some bad blood between us, but it's in the past now, I hope. Nah, they take too long to deliver. By the time it gets here, it's already cold, I said as I scrolled on Reddit, not really looking for anything in particular. I glance up at Nick, who is looking at me. McDonald's, then? I shake my head in response. They always get my orders wrong. Nick sighs. You're hard to please. I chuckle. I guess so. What do you suggest we eat, then? He crosses his arms. I shrug in response. He sighs again, this time deeper than before. Something catches my eye on my phone, an ad for a new restaurant. Hell's Kitchen. It's actually in our small town. That's creepy, I mutter under my breath. What's that? Nick calls out from the kitchen. Nothing, I call back. He walks back into the room, wiping his hands with a towel. It's just this conspiracy theory, how the government listens in on our conversations and then gives us appropriate ads. Nick raises an eyebrow. We were talking about ordering food, and I got an ad for this new food place in our town, Hell's Kitchen. He plops down on the couch next to me and leans in to look at my screen. Looks fancy. I click on the ad, which takes me to their homepage. Let's see what they have got. I navigate to their menu page, and we begin scrolling through each item. Hell wings. Nick gulps down on his saliva. I wonder how spicy those are. He absolutely loves spicy. Evil fries. What kind of name is that? They just look like regular fries. I comment, each item has a unique name related to hell. Pizza of darkness. That sounds good. Nick points out with his finger. I shake my head in disgust. It has pineapples, dude. He chuckles. Then how about Inferno Pizza? It's just spicy pepperoni. I shrug. Maybe. Definitely sounds better than pineapple. We could also get some tortured hamburgers, I point out to him. I don't feel like eating a burger, Nick replies. And you say I'm hard to please. He laughs at that. I laugh too. After discussing a couple more options, we finally settle on Pizza of Wrath. It's put together with pepperoni, bacon strips, and mushrooms, plus a mild ghost pepper sauce. Is there a number we're supposed to call, or do we order online? Nick questions as I begin looking for the phone number. Don't see an order online option. There must be a phone number listed somewhere on the website. Ah, there! Found it! I exclaim in excitement. My stomach rumbles. Nick chuckles. Me too. Me too. After confirming what we're ordering with Nick, I dial the number. It only rings once before someone picks up. I wait for a moment to let them introduce themselves, as all fast food places do, but there's only silence, so I speak first. Hello? Is this Hell's Kitchen? We'd like to order some food. A deep, raspy voice responds. Yes. What would you like to have? Okay, we'd like 2 pizzas of wrath, small, evil fries, and 2 large Cokes of Doom. I cringe internally, having actually said all that out loud. The voice waits a moment before speaking again. Is that all? I look at Nick for confirmation that I didn't forget anything, but he's preoccupied with giggling like a little girl. I'm not sure which one of us is more cringe. Yes, that will be all. Okay, it'll be delivered to you in a minute. Wait, I didn't give you my address, I shout into the receiver. But it's already too late. They hung up. I sigh and then redial. The recipient you are trying to reach is currently not available. Please try again at another time. What's up? Nick questions, having finally stopped laughing. They don't have the address and now the number is disconnected. Not available. What does that mean? I just talked to them a moment ago. I'm beginning to get irritated. Both of our heads jolt to the front door as someone rings the bell. Then we both look at each other. There's no way, right? Nick asks. I stand up and begin walking toward the front door. Looking through the peephole, I see a man dressed in a business suit with dark short hair, holding a couple of pizza boxes and a small paper bag on top. His eyes are a deep red. I didn't even know such an eye color existed. I take a deep breath, suddenly feeling nervous, and open the door. The man towers over me. He smiles. Is this Jonah's and Nick's residence? I gulp down a bunch of saliva. How does he know my name? Much less Nick's? I never mentioned it on the phone. I nod in response. He smiles. I have your food delivery here. My name is Lucifer. A deep shiver goes down my spine. An incredibly uncomfortable feeling. It's like my body is screaming at me to run back inside and slam the door shut. That whoever is standing in front of me is highly dangerous. Why don't you come inside? Nick suddenly appears beside me. I shoot Nick a look, but he ignores me. We both step aside to let Lucifer in. The delivery guy takes a deep breath once inside and walks into the living room, placing the boxes and the paper bag on the small coffee table in front of the sofa. I gulp and then speak. How much do we owe you? He turns around and smiles at both of us. Would you like to pay now or after you die? After I die? I stammered back at him. Yes, you'll sign a contract to pay after your death. I'll pay after I die, Nick says beside me, grinning. Sounds fun. I'll pay now, I respond. How would I even pay after I die? This sounds too sketchy. Nothing makes sense about this situation. Lucifer nods and claps his hands. Suddenly, 2 folders with documents appear on the small coffee table beside the food. He motions for Nick to come over and snaps his fingers, a pen appearing between his fingers, which he hands over to Nick. Nick looks excited as he takes the pen. Lucifer flips open the folder on the left. Read through this if you want, otherwise you can sign here and here. He points with his long finger to the bottom of the page. Jonah, want to come over to check your contract out? My contract? I thought I'd be paying now. He nods. Yes, you will be. I walk over with shaky legs and look at the contract laid out in front of me. Service contract. This contract is between the following parties. Contractor, Lucifer, the Prince of Darkness. Client, Jonah. Upon mutual agreement, the client will have 31 days to complete the following to pay for the services provided by the contractor. 1. Consume the food that was delivered. 2. Introduce 3 friends to Hell's Kitchen. 3. Sever ties with the closest person to the client. 4. Murder a single person. Failure to comply with these terms will result in the client immediately relinquishing their rights to their soul. What the folk is this? A joke? Can't I just pay with cash? I look up at Lucifer. He smiles and shakes his head. By ordering our food, you agreed to sign either one of the contracts provided. What's the other contract then? How do I pay after I die? He nods to himself You'll work at Hell's Kitchen for 7 years. After that, your debt will be paid off. I swallow hard and take a deep breath. I wish to pay after my death then. Lucifer claps his hands together. Excellent choice, he exclaims a little too loudly. A new contract appears before me. Service contract. This contract is between the following parties. Contractor, Lucifer, the Prince of Darkness. Client, Jonah. Upon mutual agreement, the client will work at Hell's Kitchen for 7 years after they die. Failure to comply with these terms will result in the client immediately relinquishing their rights to their soul. How did I even get here? I just wanted to get some food. Done! Nick exclaims excitedly, grinning from ear to ear, and hands the pen back to Lucifer. He points the pen toward me, signaling for me to take it. Ready to sign? What if I don't want to sign either contract? I ask, not wanting to sign either contract. Lucifer sighs and places a palm on his face. Refusal to sign either contract will result in your immediate extraction to hell, where you'll stay till the end of time. His voice suddenly turned demonic, sending a chill down my spine. I take the pen from his hand, and he retracts his palm off of his face and fixes his collar. I sign the contract with shaky hands. Excellent! Lucifer exclaimed, and then clasped his hands together. The contract suddenly disappeared. I hope you enjoy your food. He comments and begins walking back toward the front door. We will, Nick responds. Once the front door shuts behind him, I collapse on the couch, beginning to shake. Meanwhile, Nick opens up the paper bag and takes out his Coke, taking a sip. What the fuck just happened? I question him. What do you mean? They delivered our food, nothing else happened. I sigh. Since I basically signed my soul away, I might as well eat what they brought. Nick nodded profusely and opened the pizza box. In contrast to the scary experience of having to deal with Satan, the food tasted better than anything I'd ever had before. So, all that was yesterday. Me and Nick haven't talked about it again. We did have a small fight this morning. He gave me a black eye, and I broke one of his legs, so he's in the hospital right now. I don't know what came over me, or him, but I was just so incredibly angry at everything, including him, and he seemed to be the same way. I snapped out of it after I slammed a chair against his leg and heard a crack, and then a loud scream. The food was $110 in Hell's Kitchen. Would highly recommend it. The price, however, was outrageously high. I can, however, still safely say that it was worth it, and I'm thinking of ordering again. I had been out dashing every day this bitch ordered her food. Every day for lunch, she'd get fried chicken from this small place down the street from where she lived. She'd get it with all the good stuff. Mashed potatoes, green beans, potato wedges, coleslaw. God, just typing it out makes me hungry again. Again, I don't think I'm a bad person for stealing one meal. I picked up the order. I said she didn't answer the door while I parked a bit down the street and dug in. All she had to do was say she didn't get it, and she'd get refunded anyway. I'm not the bad guy here. God, it was so damn good too. Just as good as it smelled. The fried chicken was to die for. Nice and crispy skin, juicy meat, mashed potatoes perfectly smooth. The green beans had little bacon bits mixed in. I hadn't eaten that good in weeks. But I guess there's really no such thing as a free lunch. It started the day after I had my stolen lunch. I was no longer allowed to dash. Apparently the bitch whined to the site, and I'd been a mediocre dasher in the first place, so they pulled my dashing privileges. No more stealing meals for me. I was starving, though. So I heated up some pizza rolls. And then some more pizza rolls. And then I finished off the 50-count bag I'd just gotten the day before. And I was still hungry, so I warmed up a few bean burritos too. I chowed down on those while I played some League with my friends, and they got bitchy about me chewing loudly on mic, so I had to mute myself. We lost like every match because of lack of communication, but I was hungry, and I still was after the burritos and some frozen pizzas, and I even dug into the dark recesses of the cupboard and had some canned corned beef hash. I only stopped when I started feeling sick. I think my stomach was a little distended from all the food I crammed into it, but I couldn't help it. I was just so hungry, and I still felt like I could fit more in. Over the next week, I ended up cleaning out my cupboards. I went through all my peanut butter, my rice, my ramen, staples for when you're broke like I am. If I wasn't eating, I was bitching about how hungry I was. I couldn't even focus on classwork without having a granola bar to chew on. I mean, I already have trouble focusing on classwork, but you know what it's like when you're hungry. All you can think about is your stomach. I ended up just going and getting my own order of chicken from the restaurant I'd stolen from in the first place. I ordered everything the bitch did. The guy up front cracked a joke about the party I had to be going to, but I just gave him a dirty look and practically bolted to my car with my feast. I didn't even bother leaving the parking lot before I ripped open the bag and started chowing down. I looked like a pig. I knew I attracted some looks from the staff inside as I ate. I literally tipped up the tub of mashed potatoes and poured it down my throat, gravy dripping down my chin as I gulped down the goodness. On the way home, I was chewing on the chicken bones. Even after all that, I was still so hungry. I've maxed out my credit cards on groceries and takeout. I literally broke into my neighboring apartment and snatched the pot roast off the counter. From what I heard, they blamed the dog. As long as they didn't blame me, I was fine. The hunger was bad enough. It's exhausting, being hungry all the time. All I can think about for more than 3 seconds is when I'm going to eat next. But then about 4 days ago, I woke up and I was covered in hair. Like I wasn't a hairy guy before, but it's now thick as fur from the neck down. I tried shaving the more obvious away, but by the end of the day it was back. I obviously had to stop going to class. I don't know how it took me so long to realize how different I look, but that explains why a few of my friends kept asking if I felt okay. I should be looking like I belong on my 600-pound life, but I don't. I've actually lost weight. I can count my ribs. I've never been able to do that before. My skin's gone from a little pasty to practically gray, and my face looks like a famine victim's, all emaciated and shit. I was near the breaking point when I decided to seek out the bitch. Yeah, I was going to visit the woman who was supposed to get the food I stole. I mean, I would've, if I didn't get there and found out she'd been arrested. Her neighbor Hazel was more than informative, and thankfully the old bat was just happy to have someone to talk to, so she didn't ask why I was wearing a turtleneck and a hoodie in 65-degree weather. Mila, that's the bitch's real name. She'd always been an introvert, but she went full-on hermit over the past few weeks. She'd even stopped leaving her house, but a lot of cars apparently came to her, and every week the garbage would be filled with takeout boxes. Then Mila attacked the pizza delivery guy. Hazel had just been dozing off to some odd game show when someone frantically pounding on the door woke her up. Hazel opened up and the poor dude nearly bowled her over in an attempt to escape from the borderline rabid Mila. They slammed the door in her face, and Mila threw herself against it several times before screeching like a banshee and taking off back to her own house. Hazel nearly had a heart attack when she saw how much blood was pouring from Pizza Guy's face. The guy told her everything, while Hazel called 911. Mila had insisted that he stay right there while she made sure he didn't take anything, and unluckily for him, she thought there was a missing breadstick. The guy tried to calm her down, told her to just call the parlor and see if she could get a replacement or a refund, but she just lunged at him, ripped off a good chunk off his cheek, and his right ear was just completely gone. The cops came and took her away. pizza guy was whooshed off in an ambulance, and now I was left with an unsettling feeling in my stomach that it may have been a little bit my fault that pizza guy got mauled by a hangry bitch with the munchies. I want to believe there's a good, normal explanation for all this, but when I woke up this morning to antlers sprouting out of my forehead, I think I nearly lost my shit. All I could do was laugh and stare at how fucking stupid I looked. An emaciated freak with sunken, crazy eyes, furry chest and arms, and now I had horns. I finally went to the chicken place this morning with a well-angled hat and scarf to hide my freakishness. I was surprised to walk in, though, and see one of the owners up front. I asked him what was up, and I think I got the final piece of the puzzle. See, there was always the same guy up front when I picked up orders. Gus, or something. I'm a bit disoriented from low blood sugar, so names are tricky. Apparently, one of the other workers caught Gus sprinkling something a little extra in the seasoning. He refused to explain what it was, just that it added a little kick to the flavor and made people crave fried chicken even more. Of course, Gus was fired for tampering with food because he wouldn't explain what the seasoning was and refused to let anyone take it for testing. They couldn't tell me where he went or where I could find him. He's gone with the wind, him and his special seasonings. I did take an order of chicken home, but I gotta be honest, there's definitely something missing now that Gus's secret ingredient is no longer a part of the recipe. I'm so hungry.